Let me explain what you're about to watch. So, as of recording this video, I have recently covered every single category of weapon in Fortnite Save the World. So, just going from the assault weapons, SMGs, all the way to the melees and the snipers, and everything in between. Sorry, the top 5 pickaxes will not be featured in this video. I have covered every single weapon in the game that's worth talking about, and I started with the top 10 weapons in the game, which is a video that I will be referring to throughout the following 8 videos. So, what you're watching here is a supercut of all 9 of those videos. Timestamps will be in the description for every single start of each of these 9 videos, and I'm debating on whether or not I will provide the timestamps for the top 10 weapons. I do believe I'm going to actually leave those as a mystery. If you want to check out that video in the description below, you can just cut right to it. It has the timestamps for the weapons that I mentioned in that video, but for the rest of these videos, I'll just provide timestamps for the start of the assault weapons, the SMGs, the pistols, etc., and then I'm just going to let it play out. So if you've already seen all of these videos, then obviously you don't need to rewatch this because it's literally just the same videos re-uploaded, but I wanted to put everything into one big jam-packed video, just like I did with my hero videos not too long ago, where I covered every single class and then I put them all into one mega cut. So I hope you guys enjoy what will no doubt be a beast of an encyclopedia of all things weapons in Fortnite Save the World, and without further ado, let's cue the top 10 list to kick off the series. Hey guys, today I want to talk about a video series that I have wanted to make for a while, and since Epic made it pretty difficult to stream for this following month, I figured it would be a good time as any to start this series. So today I want to talk about not only what I'm going to be having in store for you guys today, but what I have planned. So today is going to be the top 10 most relevant / effective weapons in Save the World. Now, I'm going to get a couple of disclaimers out of the way right off the bat. I won't be counting the mythic weapons simply because they are pretty much unanimously understood to be the best in their category no matter what. Like, this is pretty much the best hardware, this is pretty much the best pistol, so on and so forth. So obviously the mythic weapons are insane. Use them if you have them. The list would be, you know, only 5 normal weapons if I included them. Also, there are a ton of great weapons in this game. In fact, I'll just break a little bit of professionalism, just go to monitor capture, because I use my own video for reference here. I did an entire video with Bens and Skulls, friends of mine, who are max level players, who've been playing as long or longer than I have, ranking every single ranged weapon in the game. And it took us 47 minutes of a lot of discussion to figure out this list. And even then, to this day, I don't agree with everything on here simply because the game is dynamic. It depends on your loadout, it depends on how you play, it depends on a lot of different preference things. Like you'll see on this list, I have a couple of shotguns on there, I have a sword on there, and if you don't use shotguns or swords, then this list won't relate to you personally. So I believe every single person is going to have a different opinion or a take on a top 10 list, and that's why I wanted to take a more objective approach. What I wanted to do here today was take the most meta relevant, meaning like these are the weapons that, you know, YouTubers get hyped about a new weapon's release. They say it's the best in the game, they give you a bunch of numbers, everybody gets excited, but like what I'm talking about here is a few months later when the dust settles, what are the actual best weapons that I pull out in the hardest fights. For example, the bundle bus is on the list, spoiler alert, but that's a weapon that doesn't see a lot of day-to-day use. I don't know of many players who actually pull this weapon out, but when it comes to taking down a boss fight or, you know, a really, really hard mission, the bundle bus just does something that, you know, until the Wrath came out, most weapons can't. It just packs a lot of punch at once, and it's very effective for that. I used this for about 90 of my 100 Storm King wins. That's a future video coming up. You know, that's a weapon that, you know, I feel deserved a spot on the list, but it isn't exactly a day-to-day weapon, and there are plenty of others on here that I'll talk about later. And then the other thing that I wanted to get out of the way is the fact that because this list is so complicated, if you don't see something on here, it doesn't mean that it's bad, okay? Even if you see something on here that you don't think should be here, you know, everything here will be from my own personal experience, and I want to try to keep it a bit as objective as possible. And the other thing I addressed right at the front is what I have planned. So this will be more of an opening. So what I want to do today is talk about the best weapons in the game, and then what I want to do in the following days and weeks is talk about the best weapons from every single category. So I've done this before, videos on screen, you'll see the best heroes, you know, all 4 categories plus the supercut right up at the top middle there. I will link all 5 of those videos in the description. Spoiler alert, the supercut is literally just the other 4 combined into one video, where I talked about all of the best heroes in Save the World. That was not confined to a list, I simply discussed every single hero from each category category worth talking about. And so those will be future videos that I'm going to discuss, mentioning all the best weapons in their respective categories. But today, let's kick off the list with the top 10 weapons. So I already kind of teased it, but it's the bundle bus in the number 10 slot. Now, to say this again right off the bat, disclaimer, this list is ordered from, worst to best in my opinion, but make no mistake, all of the weapons in the top 10 are very, very good and definitely dependent on whatever you're using them for, which is why I put the bundle bus in the 10th slot. I wanted to talk about this right away simply because of what I said earlier, so I'll be quick. It's really weirdly overpowered for normal missions. Like, the only thing you should really be using this for is if there's a mini boss or mist monsters. It shoots too slow for the common enemies, and it's literally overpowered because 8 shots from this thing can one-shot most mist monsters in most zones, so you don't really need it for that. But when it comes to a boss fight, I was switching back and forth between 2 bundle buses during, like I said earlier, about 90 of my 100+ Storm King fights. So these, if for the right situation, the bundle bus is by far one of the most powerful weapons in the game. Next on my list is, again, we're going in the spirit of meta-relevant / usefulness. So we'll be talking about the Obliterator, and the Obliterator wouldn't be well talked about or discussed without mentioning the Neon Sniper. So the Obliterator I put on here for a couple of reasons. It's not the strongest sniper in the game, I don't believe. I don't think it headshots as much. It might crit for the most, that might be true, but a lot of people might not use this as their main sniper because it kicks a lot and it's hard to use, but defenders love this weapon. And trust me, in the highest zones, handing off a crit rating, crit damage, that's why I always have at least 3 of these crafted. Crit rating, crit damage Obliterators to my nearest defender, 3 of them is definitely a regular thing that I do. And utility is very important because I use the Obliterators to clear trees and, houses for death pits all the time. They are very, very, very useful for that. In that respect, like I mentioned, it might not come off immediately as a strongest weapon, should be in the top 10, but when you get down to it, at least I and friends that I play with end up using the Obliterator quite a lot. So I believe it deserves number 9 on our list. Number 8 is going to be probably a controversial one. Again, this will depend on if you like melee weapons, but it's the Storm King's Ravage. Oh wait, I'm not talking about those. It's little brother, the Spectral Blade. So, in my opinion, once again, I'm not really a melee player. I don't use a ton of melees. I'll admit it right now, I might not be the most qualified to talk about them, but what I do know is the Spectral Blade is one of the most diverse and effective swords in the entire game. It is so powerful that I have never once, while using a melee character, felt the need to use another weapon. I say need because, sure, you might want to change it up, have a little bit of fun with some other stuff, but if you're just trying to get the job done, I have brought the Spectral Blade plus the correct ninja loadout, link below, into the highest zones. We're talking 144 players, 174 power level husks, and I was not the one holding the team back in those missions. So the Spectral Blade is an extremely useful weapon, not to mention a great utility. If you up that heavy attack, you can get around pretty quickly. Now, I did, casually link that ninja loadout, but I will address one thing that has changed since its upload, and that is Monster Smash. If you are going to be using any melee loadout, I highly recommend giving Arlene Iza at least the courtesy of a consideration, because that life leech on every single hit is super useful for staying in the fight. Now, number 7 on my list is once again a weapon that a lot of people might not see coming, but this weapon gained quite a lot of credit with me when it first released because of how much it impressed me and how well it compared to some of the top weapons in the game. I'll say it before I continue that I believe this should have been higher on my list, but, you gotta order them somehow, and that is the Gamatron 9000. Again, some of you might not have ever even used this weapon, but if you haven't, I would highly recommend giving it a try if you have it. This did come out as purple schematic, so if you played during the sci-fi event, you might have one just sitting down here. But if you've used this weapon, then you might know that it is surprising. So it is a 3-burst weapon, which might turn off a lot of people, but if you hold left click, it actually deals an extremely high damage per second. The Gamatron is a pretty boring weapon in that respect. It's simply exactly that. You hold left click and the rapid burst shoot as if it's a fully auto weapon, and trust me, when you pull this thing out, the damage will speak for itself. Moving on from the Gamatron 9000, let's talk about the last one in the bottom half of our list, which is the Black Drum Shotgun. Once again, something I expect a little bit of kickback with, because I know a lot of people really don't like the black metal set, but trust me, when it comes to combat, I have not seen very many shotguns that can even do what this weapon can do. The Black Drum shotgun shoots 2 projectiles very quickly. I mean, you can't not shoot 2 projectiles, so basically every shot is doubled. So if you say it does 30,000, it's going to shoot twice for 60,000, and if you kill an enemy fast enough, you can even sometimes hit the enemy behind it. Stunning or knocking back an enemy reduces your current health by a good bit, and that extra explosive damage that comes out of that just does an area of effect damage to everything you're shooting at. This weapon is, if you hit a couple of nice crits and you have a correct shotgun loadout, link below, it is an extremely good weapon for taking down mist monsters and high-level enemies extremely quickly. It's locked to physical and fire, but I have not seen many situations where it holds it back. Of course, if there's a smasher or something that's an element, that half damage is going to hurt a lot, but that's true with any physical weapon, and I do believe that the Black Drum sits very comfortably as one of the top 5 shotguns in the entire game. The reason that I put it on this list, other than some other ones like the Double Boiler, which also shoots slow but packs an insanely high punch, is because it's just more usable, in my opinion. The way that it shoots 2 shots and you don't have to reload it after every single couple shots like the Double Boiler, a magazine size of 2 really holds a weapon like this back. I find it that it's more useful in, you know, regular day-to-day missions. That being said, it is more of a difficult weapon to use because obviously a weapon that hurts you in the process of using it is something that you're going to want to definitely check, and that's why I recommend using Blast from the Past, Coconuts, and just being careful because even though you'll be low on health, the damage will definitely be worth it if you can manage that wisely. Now to the top 5, and I'm going to kick it off with an old favorite of mine. This won't surprise many of you, but I'm going to be talking about the Hemlock, which surprises me because honestly, this, depending on how I was feeling when I made this list, probably could have been in the number 1 slot, tied with a few others. You'll see what I did later. But the Hemlock is one of the classics, and it's only in the number 5 slot, probably because of its 6 perk. So if you can get a 6 perk that snares the enemy, that's a very, very good one, but that extra shield that it gives you used to be very, very useful until they added the Blast from the Past team perk. So having a 6 perk that buffs your shield when you don't have one is kind of a major drawback, but it doesn't really matter when the weapon is as powerful as this. Again, I can't really illustrate that without just putting the weapon in your hand, but you're just going to have to trust me that this thing is just a powerhouse. So the Hemlock is an old favorite of mine because it came out over a year ago at this point, but if it returns to the game, I highly recommend checking this out and speccing it properly. A link to all of my videos will be in the description below. There's not much more to say about the Hemlock. It is probably, in my opinion, one of the standouts from the medieval set, even though it's not the only good one from that set. The Hemlock is just a fantastic all-around SMG. Number 4 on my list is, again, probably not going to surprise people. I think for the top 5 here, you're not going to see too many surprises because I would imagine most people know what the best weapons are, and that is the little brother of the Blastotron 9000, the Blastotron Mini. The Blastotron Mini, ironically, the SMG is doing way more damage than the AR. This thing, again, is just a powerhouse. I mean, you put the right pistol loadout on this thing, which you don't even need anymore, seeing as pistol loadouts affect SMGs as well, and the AR loadouts affect SMGs. There are a lot of heroes that can help this weapon nowadays, and it is just insane. I think when it first came out, if you use the right loadout, this thing could do 1,000,000 DPS, and there's just really no bad way to go about this. This was one of the very few weapons when I made my perk guide on this that I recommended running a reload speed perk instead of damage here because it didn't need it. The Blastotron Mini was doing so much damage that it didn't need the help. It was a very, very, very powerful weapon, and to this day is still one of my regular energy weapons. If I'm feeling lazy and I'm not using a very powerful loadout, or I'm just kind of fooling around with my friends, this is the kind of weapon I pull out when I'm running a constructor and I just want something that'll just melt everything in sight, because this will do exactly that. The Blastotron Mini is absolutely one of the standouts of the sci-fi set, and if you haven't tried it out, I think you should, pull it out of the collection book, wipe off the dust, and just see for yourself. Number 3 on the list is going to start a trend that will only continue, and that is yet another sci-fi weapon. This is basically the weapon that put the Black Drum so low on the list, and that is the Pulsar 9000. Once again, probably going to be a controversial pick because shotguns, like I said, aren't everybody's forte, but if you've ever put on the correct loadout and ran the Pulsar 9000, you will find that encampments are no longer difficult, crowds of enemies disappear before your eyes, and even smashers don't always have time to charge if you hear crits. The Pulsar 9000 stands crowned, chief among everything, as many people regard it as the most powerful shotgun in the game, and that is not only because of its damage, but because of its area of effect. that ring that it shoots just goes through all the enemies in front of you. It doesn't have an extremely high range, but everything in front of that and everything affected by that ring basically just disappears in front of you, and the Pulsar 9000 is an absolute treat to use if you can just stay close quarters. That being said, you know, as we're making this video, the new mythic weapons haven't come out, and it's rumored that a shotgun and a sniper will follow. There might not be any truth to that, but obviously, you know, any mythic weapon might top this. But again, the Pulsar 9000 is one of, if not the best, all-around shotgun in the game. However, it's not actually the highest DPS, but you're going to have to stick around for the honorary mentions to hear what those ones are. Now for the number 1, number 2 slot. So I say that as the number 2 slot technically on my list, but the number 1 otherwise, and you'll see what I mean, because the number 1 slot is definitely going to a pair of rocket launchers. We are going to be talking about something that should surprise nobody, because if you've been playing this game and you've been listening to my streams, you've been hanging out, you should know that the Silent Spectre is just, no matter how you slice it, the highest DPS non-mythic SMG in the entire game. I was going to say assault weapon, but it got, you know, classed as an SMG, but that changed nothing. It is just amazing. Not only does it have the highest damage per second, like it just doesn't yield in terms of DPS. If you hit headshots, you double your DPS. It has an insane base crit chance of 20. Most weapons have 10, and the good weapons have 15. This one has a base of 20, so it crits basically every other shot. Its fire rate is nice and clean. 12 isn't insanely high. It's not slow, and it's perfectly enough because that crit's going to be hitting so much damage. You're not going to want it to shoot too fast anyway. Not like you're going to be dragging your magazine of 52, assuming you're running a mag size perk. And then, of course, a 2-second reload time without a reload perk. I mean, come on. High magazine size, high damage, very acceptable fire rate, and a really fast reload. This weapon literally only has one drawback, and that's its range/accuracy. And even then, when we're talking about Save the World, 90% of your fights are happening within a 4 to 6 tile radius anyway, or 6 tile or less, I should say. So the range drop off for this thing more than covers that, and will almost never hold you back if you're using this weapon responsibly. The Silent Spectre is just amazing. And now this spot is tied with not one but 2 other weapons, and that's because the Bobcat does pretty much everything I just said about the Silent Spectre, but in different ways. Where the Silent Spectre has, you know, a little bit of a faster fire rate, it has less mag size and a little bit of a faster reload, but the Bobcat is absolutely almost identical damage per second. It can be perked to shoot extremely fast because it has a 2 fire rate perk. And every time anybody's ever sliced it, you know, the Bobcat and the Silent Spectre have been fighting for number 1 crown, and every single place where they don't hold up next to each other, the other one just kind of handles it. You can see that if I compare the two, let me actually do the same element if at all possible here, you can see that they just trade blows. You know, Bobcat has higher damage, Spectre has higher crit chance and fire rate, has a higher mag size, better reload, better impact. I mean, they just trade blows in every single way, and I would honestly believe that you can use the Bobcat and the Silent Spectre interchangeably and be perfectly effective in combat. Everybody has their preferences towards one or the other, but I do believe when it comes down, you know, mathematically, they are neck and neck. That being said, this one might surprise a lot of people, but the Hacksaw actually compares extraordinarily well as well. The Hacksaw, when I had my Bobcat spec'd in a fire rate damage loadout, which is identical DPS to crit rate and crit damage, they were pretty much the same. But the Hacksaw has its own little perk, so if you run reload speed on it, not only does it have a faster reload, but a whopping 100 base magazine size, which can be buffed to 175 if you want to take a hit to the reload. And then it just has very, very consistent damage, accuracy, mag size for high rate of sustained fire that will just mow down, you know, saw away, if you will, everything in front of you. That's why I believe the Bobcat, Silent Spectre, and Hacksaw share the crown as some of the best ranged weapons in the entire game. I say it that way because the number 1 slot just has to be taken by the rocket launchers, which are their faithful companions in my opinion. Anybody who's playing this game should probably know that a launcher isn't really going to be your primary. It just doesn't have the durability, it's too expensive, it's just not a responsible way to play. You can do it. I mean, to save the world, you can pretty much do anything, but the rockets are usually not your primary. But I just wouldn't be responsible if I didn't put the Deatomizer, the Santa's Little Helper, and the Metal Marauder tied for the number 1 slot. Obviously, like I said right off the bat, the Wrath is just this thing is just a laser beam. That zap cannon of a weapon, not to, take away from anything, because we all know that the zap cannon is bottom tier, but I do mean it is literally a zap cannon. The thing's just a laser beam. It just obliterates everything in front of you, even after the nerf. If you don't have that, then the Deatomizer and the Santa's Little Helper kind of trade blows. Now, I'll put the Metal Marauder on the back burner for now, simply because it's basically the black metal equivalent of the Santa's Little Helper. It has, if I'm not mistaken, higher damage, which isn't immediately noticeable because its fifth perk adds the bonus damage based on your missing health, which does not factor into the sheet DPS. So even though it looks like it's less, it's quite a bit more. But it also hurts you in the process and has a slower reload time, but a much higher impact. If you roll all impact perks on this thing, you'll send smashers flying with every single shot. So it's got a little bit more utility, but as I mentioned earlier with the Black Drum Shotgun, it's an extremely dangerous weapon to use because you will kill yourself in the process if you're not careful. That being said, it's, functionally in the world of damage, the same as the Santa's Little Helper, because they're both hitting for more than enough to one-shot all but basically miss monsters. So focusing back on the Santa's Little Helper and the Deatomizer, they basically trade blows wherever. It's not exactly going to show up on the sheet DPS, but the Deatomizer shoots in a singular explosion that blows out to 7 more explosions for a great area of effect damage. So even if it's not immediately hitting as hard as the Santa's Little Helper, it consistently does more damage in a wide area. And I also hold it in a very firm belief that the sheet DPS is bugged because it says it's doing 43 damage, but in my experience, it's just doing more. I almost never watch it hit for less than 100k, and even if it does, if I'm mistaken, it explodes out to make up for that damage greatly. Sometimes a smasher will get impacted at just the right way to hit it at, on the side, and then the explosions that come out from that initial explosion will hit the smasher again. I've one-shotted many missed monsters doing that, and it is quite a treat to behold. Now, the Santa's Little Helper basically does that initial impact, that strong, hard-hitting damage, but it doesn't explode out. So, you're kind of, you got a lot of give and take here. And the Santa's Little Helper used to have quite a bit less durability, and I do believe that's true. I think the actual ammo consumption for the Deatomizer is less, so even though they both have 150 durability, the Deatomizer may last quite a bit longer, so it might be a bit more economical solution. But the Santa's Little Helper is just such a hard-hitting weapon. What more can I say? And that's basically my top 10 list, you guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I thought this would be a lot tougher, but when I started making the list, it was a bit easier to weed out the best weapons from the worst than I thought. I mean, you really just got to simplify it to, like, from my experience and my gameplay, watching other people play, playing with friends, and talking to chat, what are the true weapons that I always default back to when I'm not just trying out something new? And that's what I showed you guys here today. That being said, I'm going to go straight into some honorable mentions, and that's right off the bat is the old bazooka. I love to give this weapon its credit where credit is due. I used to have it as energy, nature, water, and fire just to pull it out whenever I needed it for the correct mission. And that, I think, is still a good way to go. If you're a lower level player and you don't have any of the launchers that I've mentioned here today, I think the bazooka is still a fantastic choice. I mean, durability might not be useful anymore because they buffed all the rockets to last for quite a bit longer. So running reload on this is not a bad way to go. You'll get off more shots per second. Double damage is because crit damage is a pretty bad choice when you're shooting once, like 0.75 shots a second. It's just not fast enough. I mean, you have to reload, so that's not really a real number anyway. Realistically, with this, we're shooting every 1.8 seconds, so that's just too few shots to be crossing your fingers for a crit shot. I don't know why I have damage to miss monsters on this. It was a very long time ago when I used this weapon. The Santa's Little Helper came out and just dwarfed it in every single statistical department. But if you don't have any other options, the bazooka is still a fantastic choice. And again, I'm catering a little bit to the newer players with some of these honorable mentions by bringing up the Siegebreaker. Oh, it's an old favorite. I know, it's the Battle Royale Scar. It's the first thing we looked for when we came to save the world. It doesn't hold up in the late game. It's not the best weapon, but it does actually do pretty decent damage. I say that, but with the right loadout, I made a video on this recently where I was kind of surprised at how well it actually did in the late game. It's just not, it's really just not a crown jewel. But if you are, again, if you don't have tons of options, this is a weapon you could use all the way up to Twine Peaks. You might want to replace it for something a little bit better down the line, but it is a fantastic choice for the early game. And that brings me to the double boiler. I mentioned it would be in the honorable mentions. It is an extremely hard-hitting, very good range shotgun that is honestly just a treat to use. I recently rediscovered this when I was playing around with shotguns, and it just slays. This thing is an amazing shotgun. It almost always one-shots, and then it crits whenever you're shooting at the mist monsters. Oh, it's beautiful. And I can also compare it to the Stalwart Squire, which I can't actually show because, I don't have the weapon for a very good reason. The Stalwart Squire, if I recall, shoots, I think it hits for like 130,000 base damage, depending on how you load it out. And if you crit, it does north of like 500k. It is, I think, commonly regarded as the strongest shotgun in the game, but it has a 1-to-1 damage to durability to shot ratio. What that means is every single shot, it loses a durability point, and it only lasts for about 300 shots if you make it Shadow Shard, which is extraordinarily expensive. For reference, most shotguns can get off about most weapons can get off about your ammo capacity. So you can hold about 1,200 shots. Most shotguns in my testing last for about 900 shots. So to have 1/3 or less your normal shots for a weapon is just not worth the amount of power that it gives you, not to mention you have to reload after every shot. But this video wouldn't be complete if I didn't mention a weapon that powerful. And lastly, I think is the one true honorable mention. This is the one where I'm really talking about a weapon that probably should have been on the list, and I probably should have brought it up, but it's the Pain Train. It's literally named the Pain Train because it does so much damage. It's just a very good weapon. The reason I took it off this list is because every time I've ever used it, it's just the accuracy, you guys. It just doesn't, maybe I'm biased, maybe it's the same as the Silent Spectre, but I just feel like it can't really work in all of the situations that I want it to. That being said, it is a wonderfully themed holiday weapon, and it's just a very powerful weapon. So if you can get the right perk on this bottom one, damage or crit, or I don't even know all the options, it's a very, very good weapon and should definitely be given a consideration. That being said, I'm also going to add it to add that right in here with the Swan, because the Swan is very similar in a way. It has the exact same crit, like 6 perk variant, and it's just another weapon that works really, really well, and you might have even forgot that it existed. So that's it. Those are my picks for the top 10 most relevant, most powerful weapons in Save the World, plus some honorable mentions to get my bases covered. There are a lot of weapons that could have been on this list, that probably should have been on this list, that are very, very powerful. I'm hovering over them now. Am I hinting hard enough? But if you thought something should have been on here, make a case for it in the comments below. Talk about it, let me know what you thought. Let me know if you agree or what if you disagree, what I should have added. Maybe I didn't know something that I said. Maybe I said something incorrect. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been a long time coming. I've been putting this video off for a while, so I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you guys have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next one. Sorry, I had to move my mic over. Today we're going to be talking about what will hopefully be the first video in a series of videos, so there's no need to watch them in order, but today we're going to be talking about the best assault weapons in Fortnite Save the World, and there are a couple disclaimers I gotta get out of the way right away. They recently split the game into SMGs and assault weapons, so if you don't see a lot of the weapons that you might be thinking about, if I can scroll down to find them here, where are they hiding them? A lot of the assault weapons that were assault weapons are now SMGs, so we're not going to be talking about any of them in today's video. They're going to need their own topic, but that's kind of a perk for both of us, because this video would have been a lot longer if that split hadn't been made when I was making this video the first time around. And the other thing is, as with any best video, as with any time anybody's ever talked about the best weapons in the game, they are limited by their own experience. Now, I try to stay objective as possible. I try to go based off of numbers and, the actual technical tier list, because as much as I'd love to treat every weapon equally, there are some weapons that do more damage than others. It's just as simple as that. But in Fortnite Save the World, a lot of the weapons behave very differently, and damage per second is really not always the king here. Like the Hydra, its damage per second is irrelevant, because if you run it with first shot Rio for that maximum crit damage, you're going to be killing in one shot, so how fast you can shoot is completely irrelevant. And then there's a lot of weapons that are very different, and I don't want to get into all those right away, but and that's it basically. I try to stay objective, so I think my word is pretty sound, but again, I am limited by my own experience, and for that reason I'm actually going to start off with my personal most controversial pick, and that is the Wraith, because recently I just released a top 10 video on all the best weapons in Save the World. I highly recommend checking that out. That's more of an introduction to this series covering all of the weapons, but the Wraith was commented quite a bit. People were like, where's the Wraith? What are you talking about? Top 10 weapons, where is it? And I don't know, you guys. I don't know where to start with this. Like, it is a very high-powered weapon, amazing crit damage. It's got the 48% crit chance that comes with a lot of the best silenced military weapons, and its damage per second is good. You know, high damage per shot, great headshot multiplier. I mean, everything's working well for this weapon, except for that 6.4 fire rate. Every single time I've ever taken this weapon into combat, I just wasn't impressed. I mean, I even made it all gold. When I first made my video on this, not really personally recommending it, I had it all blue, and I've since made it gold, and it just doesn't shoot fast enough. Its accuracy goes to shit after about 10 shots, and then it just kind of... you got better options, okay? That's my opinion on that. The Wraith is a great high-powered weapon. If you're just dinking around, it's really accurate for the first 10 shots, so you can just kind of like tip-tap most enemies, but... I mean, when it comes to like a hard enemy like a Smasher, once you start spraying, you'll really wish that you had a Silent Spectre in your hands. I mentioned the Silent Spectre because it's basically the SMG equivalent, except for the fact that like it's more of like the SMG doppelganger, if you will, because it's just got a much higher fire rate, and then it's got a much less damage, but it's much more consistent damage output. So don't be fooled by that less damage. That fire rate more than makes up for it. And that's why I don't personally recommend the Wraith. However, it is a good weapon that you can totally give a shot. Now, I do have most of the best ARs leveled up at this point. I mean, I'm a 131 player who's logged in how many days, since some people care about this? 448. Like, I don't have the most experience in the world, but I have used pretty much every weapon here that's 130, obviously, and I feel like I've got a pretty good opinion of what should be looked for. So these videos are also mostly just for entertainment, something to cause a discussion, but also for newer players who are looking out for what they should be upgrading. And that's with, like, the Beat Blaster and the Blackout are two weapons I'll get out of the way right off the bat. They are good weapons. Pretty much every weapon I have 130 here, pretty much, not all of them. I don't know why this links is here. I do know why. I'll explain that in a second. But most of these weapons are worth using. The Beat Blaster and the Blackout are two slower firing, two-shot at a time weapons. They're almost identical in that regard. I do believe they both fire 2 shots at a time, coincidentally. And the Beat Blaster makes enemies dance, and you can get a damage buff to go with that. I think there's another perk where, you can do more damage to dancing enemies. And with the Blackout AR, it actually adds damage based on your missing health, which is a really, really unique trait, and a lot of newer players don't like that. Even the late game players don't like that because they don't like their weapons hurting them. That being said, it does a lot of damage, and I really think it's worth checking out. Obviously, it's locked to physical and fire, which is kind of a drawback, whereas the Beat Blaster can do whatever it wants, but we're not really meant to be comparing these two weapons. I just thought they were similar enough to talk about at the same time. And as of recording this video, the Blizzard Blitzer is less than a week old and already one of my favorite weapons. I think there is a better 6 perk than this, but the Blizzard Blitzer is more of just a fun weapon. It's basically the AR snowball launcher. It doesn't giggle while you shoot it, but it does a pretty decent amount of damage for what it is. It's locked to water, and it's just really, really fun for a more holiday-themed weapon. And then the Dragon's Roar, I'm only going to mention it because it's on my screen. It's a fun old weapon. I mean, if you have it, it's fun. The Duet was just like the Lynx, where I put this in my collection book, but they took crystal weapons out of the collection book, so these reappeared in my inventory. Nothing worth writing home about there, in my opinion. The Gamatron 9000 actually made my top 10 list, so if you did check out that video, then this will be something that is familiar to you guys. I actually have 2 of these schematics because the 7 projectiles exploding set off propane, and I wanted the crit rating one instead, so I maxed out 2 of them because it's such an awesome weapon. If you haven't used the 3-burst Gamatron 9000, you can hold left click to make it basically shoot full auto, and it's a fun, very powerful weapon. And the Gravedigger, we wouldn't be complete talking about all the best assault rifles if we don't bring up the Gravedigger and at least talk about it, because power creep has definitely gotten to this weapon. It's not top tier. It was at one point, but it's kind of fallen off. It's, I think our tier list, we put it in like the B or A tier. It's a good weapon. You can use it. A lot of people use it as their dedicated fire weapon, but it's mostly just a really, really kick-ass Halloween-themed AR that is more or less just fun to use when you're looking for something fun. And that moves us on to the hacksaw, which actually made the number 2 slot on my tier list for best weapons in the game. Just a powerhouse. I mean, great fire rate, damage, mag size, reload perk is good, long durability, decent range. It keeps its accuracy. There are no drawbacks on the hacksaw. Great perks and everything. Fire rate and damage is statistically identical to crit rating and crit damage. So if you think that's holding it back, then check again. And the Hydra I mentioned right off the bat, so I'll kind of gloss over it. I put it in here as a discussion topic because it's a good weapon all around. It really is. But if you're really going to use this weapon for everything it can go for, give it double crit damage and run it with first shot Rio. If you don't know who that is, I'll link my soldier video below on all the best soldiers in the game. She will be time-stamped in the description, and you guys can check her out without wasting any time at all. Suffice to say that she does give you a guaranteed crit chance on your first 6 shots after a reload. Obviously, the video below will go into more detail. And the Mercury LMG, oh, an old favorite of mine. That one was brought up again in my top 10 list because people were like, where is it? It's an amazing weapon. And it was, just like the Gravedigger. It used to be widely regarded as one of the best weapons in the entire game, and it was. But that 6th perk, every 5 shots on a target, it does a 70% of your damage to nearby enemies, used to be very bugged. In fact, it would do more of like 150% damage sometimes, and that was amazing for crowd clearing. You could simply shoot at a smasher and just kill everything around it, and it was amazing. But now that damage doesn't really do as much. It's got a lot of damage per shot and then a really slow fire rate. And it's just kind of a... Yeah, you can see what I did to it here. I wanted to get a 400 mag size for a video, link below. But obviously there is a much better way to perk this, and I'll link that video right next to the reason that this has 4 mag size perks, because with the right hero loadout, I could shoot this thing for over 2 minutes straight. And, it is a fun weapon. It's not top tier anymore, but, this is a video somewhat catered towards what you should level up, and I think the Mercury LMG is worth your attention. And the Pain Train is just an awesome weapon. I mean, it's a train. It sounds and shoots and looks just like a train, and it's a very, very powerful train at that, and one of my favorite weapons to pull out. I made mine Frost just to match the aesthetic. Of course, there are all the element choices on this. Honestly, the Pain Train is one of those weapons where if you had... if you wanted to theme it and make it all, all the different elements, like I've done with some of my SMGs down here, if we can take a trip down south, that is probably a good weapon to go for because the Pain Train works in almost every situation. Now, moving on to the last few here. The Siegebreaker, again, it's not the best weapon in the game. Some people like to fight me on this. It's not great in the end game compared to what is out there, but that's only in comparison. It is a great weapon. I mean, it holds up, on its own. It will do damage. It will kill enemies fairly effectively, even in the highest zones, but there are better options when you get to the late game. However, if you do have a Siegebreaker and you're not even in Canny Valley yet, I think you should hold on to this one and use it for quite a while because it ages well enough. It just gets replaced by other better weapons in the late game. The Swan is great, just like the Pain Train. It's definitely shares a 6 perk, but that's pretty much it. I mean, it's just another weapon that I almost always forget exists. It's a good weapon, but other better options. I will discuss the Candy Corn LMG here for you guys quick because I do get asked about it quite often when I don't mention it. The Candy Corn LMG being locked to physical holds it back pretty poorly. It's got great perks. You can set it up really, really well. But its saving grace right now is Rocking Riff. People have been running triple crit damage and then just relying on the totally rocking out team perk. When I didn't bring up this video on my top 10 list, it was mostly because I wanted to mention weapons that didn't need a team perk to be good, and that seems to be the case with Candy Corn LMG. I haven't found it to be exceptional in any way when it's not set up properly, but again, I am only limited by my experience and what I've seen from other people's gameplay. So if this is your favorite weapon, then by all means keep using it. I'm not recommending that you don't. I'm simply talking about my opinion for the best ARs in Fortnite Save the World. There is one more honorable mention as I'm scanning through the list here, and that's the Terminator. It's basically like a slightly worse version of the Hacksaw. If you don't have the Hacksaw, use the Terminator. I think it's great. I do believe I have one leveled up. Ah, yes, it's favorited right at the top. That's right. I almost forgot about a couple, you guys. The Bundle Bus was also in my top 10 series. These favorited weapons. I had a list here, you guys, and then I'm just not even keeping to it. The Bundle Bus is one of those weapons that you kind of need to use in a boss fight or something. It's really, really good for taking down Mist monsters fast and heavy enemies quickly, but It's almost overpowered for day-to-day missions, and because of its slow fire rate, it kind of requires a certain playstyle to use, and that's kind of that's kind of a drawback in my opinion. But last and certainly not least is the Storm King Scourge. This is I mean, I saved it to the last because I almost wasn't even gonna mention it. I mean, obviously, it's the best AR in the game. I mean, it's insanely powerful. You can switch between enemies to just mow down crowds. Its perks are amazing. You can do whatever you want with the Storm King Scourge. I have no issues with this weapon whatsoever, and that's why in my top videos I almost never even mention the mythic weapons because they're just dominant in their category. What else can I say? Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you in the next one. Welcome back, everybody, to my wholesome program on the best weapons. And oh my god, could you imagine if I talked like that the whole way? Today we're going to be talking about the best SMGs in Fortnite Save the World, which is interesting because it's kind of a mighty little bunch, pun intended. So the SMGs are a new subclass, if you will. I think I'm sorting by name right now. I should get back to the subtypes here. So subtypes are obviously just the type of weapon that it is. And last time we talked about ARs. There's absolutely no need to watch these videos in order, but you know, last time we talked about the ARs, which used to be all one category. Used to just have assault weapons. So almost every single SMG I talk about here today was an AR, and then the rest of them are, you know, already SMGs or they were a pistol. So you'll see the Dirge song. This thing shoots in like a 9-round burst, which is I think the only weapon that does that. Close thing is the bundle bust that does 8, and that I think would have been a pistol if it wasn't added as an SMG. I know the Blastotron Mini was a pistol. The Lightning pistol was, well, I'll let you guess if that one was an assault weapon or a pistol. The Cyclone was a pistol, or the Monsoon if you max it out. You get my point at this point. So the SMGs are kind of their own subclass now. If you're watching this video and you don't know about the new hero reworks, that is fine because the SMGs are also affected by the soldiers, all the same, and the pistol loadouts. So all the pistol Outlanders also affect SMGs, which, if I'm not mistaken, makes SMGs the winner in terms of most heroes affecting them category. I'm sure that's a competition somewhere, but SMGs get buffed by almost everything, and that's amazing considering that SMGs are some of the strongest weapons in the entire game, seeing as the Silent Spectre and the Bobcat were tied for the number 2 slot on my top 10 weapons in Save the World list, and the Hemlock also had a spot on that list. So you should check out that video in the description below. I can tell you right now that the number 2 slot was right underneath rocket launchers, so they basically had the number 1 spot. That being said, we're actually going to start pretty alphabetical here, not perfectly, but pretty alphabetical. There are no mythic weapons currently in the game, so to future-proof this video a little bit, you should definitely make sure that you're aware of all the new weapons being added to the game, and if there is a mythic SMG, I guarantee it'll catapult itself to the top of the list. But, you know, as I said, alphabetically, we'll talk about the Blastotron Mini, which also had a spot on my top 10 list. Amazing weapon. I mean, I'll have best perks videos for every single weapon that I have a video on. I'll link my playlist in the description below. You can find whatever weapon you want, but the Blastotron Mini is definitely one you're going to want to know about. It's amazing crit damage right here is because I have the Beetlejuice character selected as my hero loadout, but this pistol or SMG now is just an amazing, you know, decent fire rate, high damage. It's just a winner in every respect. And the next two that I want to talk about is going to get something right out of the way, and that is the Silent Spectre versus the Bobcat. These two have been clashing heads in the community for quite a while now, basically since they both came out in the military set, I think in 2018 or at least late 2017, something like that. Point is, they're in the game right now, and these two are pretty much neck and neck for the best weapons in the entire game. I'm not going to go too far into this. I've already talked about this in other videos. Suffice it to say that the Bobcat and the Silent Spectre are almost identical damage per second. I think the Silent Spectre wins out in the end, but the Bobcat has a bigger mag size, the Silent Spectre has a better fire rate. Like, they just, every single metric, they just trade blows and are both insanely powerful weapons. I'd say I personally, and pretty much everybody in the community, leans a little bit towards the Silent Spectre. I think that's because it has a much quicker base reload speed, and it just, you know, it moves around faster, it feels like. It's just a little bit easier to wield, even though the switch times may be identical. I just gotta say the Silent Spectre feels better all around. That slow reload on the Bobcat makes it feel pretty clunky. That said, the Bobcat was, I think, one of my very first range weapons that I maxed out behind the Gravedigger, and it was one of my first good 130 weapons that I used way early on. I can remember now that when I first started playing in June of 2018, the Bobcat was like my first good legendary weapon where my friends were like, oh, level that one up. And I'm going to tell the same to you guys. If you are new to the game or you don't have a ton of maxed out weapons, the Bobcat is certainly something you should hold on to and even use. Even if the Silent Spectre's better, they're both fantastic weapons, and I highly recommend. I mean, look at this suite we've got here. All the elements on that one, all the elements on that one. Trust me, I don't make a schematic for every single element unless the weapon is phenomenal, so I highly recommend both. I'm going to kind of skip over the Dirge song because I'm just not qualified. I've used it in a couple of missions with the proper loadout and without the proper loadout. It's kind of not great. You might disagree with that. That's fine. I haven't used it that much, but the few times that I did, it did not impress me. So I'll move right on to the Hemlock, which is another schematic that I have all the elements for. It's just fantastic. This should be re-releasing in the winter event of 2019. It is currently December 19th, so it'll be a little bit after today after you watch this video. This is just an amazing weapon. Again, high fire rate, great damage, a base 15 crit chance, which means it goes up to 43% when you get a crit rating perk on there. And it's just, it's same story as the Sound Spectre. High damage, fire rate, mag size, range, accuracy, decent reload. Great weapon. If you're not using Blast from the Past, then having this shield buff is great. It's basically a 35% bonus shield if you start firing before you actually start in combat. And then if you are using Blast from the Past, I highly recommend looking for one with a Snare 6 perk. You can see that I've got 2 of these lined up, and future rich beast that has everything might be maxing out another set of schematics for the Hemlock because I love this weapon so much. It's almost like a personal triumph for me because I discovered this weapon and tried it out and leveled it up and found out its power on my own as one of my very first weapons that I quote-unquote discovered. I don't own this weapon by any stretch of the imagination. What I mean is I had a lot of higher level players that kind of mentored me when I was first starting to play this game, friends of mine who enjoyed Save the World and walked me through it, and this was one of the very first weapons that I recognize as a powerful weapon on my own, and that feels kind of good. I would hope that everybody watching this video has a little moment like that where they use the bundle bus and found out that it could one burst and miss monster before anybody told them. It's kind of a fun thing, and so the Hemlock has a nice little special place in my heart as one of my favorite weapons. So even if that 6 perk doesn't line up, I'm always going to use it. And then, of course, the lightning pistol is not a pistol, and they should definitely rename this thing, but it's one of those weapons that seriously flies under the radar as one of the best weapons that nobody knows about. It's a little bit hard to control, but everything else that I said before, insane fire rate, mag size, damage, it's got low damage, high fire rate. It's just a try this one out. Trust me, I don't have any gameplay for this one, but you're going to be impressed, and you're gonna appreciate the recommendation. And then I'm gonna backpedal a little bit because I should have mentioned the Rat-a-tat with the Blastotron Mini. The Rat-a-tat is one of those really good X pistols. I was going to say machine pistols, but I'm adapting to the new times, you guys. This is just another really decent, high fire rate, everything. But as far as I understand it, from what I've been told and have experienced myself, it's basically just a weaker version of the Blastotron Mini. So you're welcome to power it up, use it. Great weapon. If you don't have the Blastotron Mini, go for it. But it's basically a lower version of that. So moving on from that, I kind of want to, before I mention the rest of the best SMGs, I want to go through a fleet of weapons that I haven't used a ton myself, but I've researched enough to understand that they're really decent and worth your time. And that's the Viper, Thrasher, and Riptide. All 3 of these weapons, kind of including the Vintertech Blazer, are all like really good B and C tier weapons. Like if you're ranking up and you're not even in candy yet, for example, you're just a lower level player getting into the groove of things, then these are weapons that could do you pretty well. They might not be worth, wasting any reperk on or whatever, but I would like to say that these are weapons that I have intended on leveling up for a while. You can see I'm actually stockpiling these schematics because getting Snare is typically better than Affliction, but both are great, and then getting a perk that matches in the 5th perk. I want to level these up and give them a shot because the last time I did that with the Monsoon, I really enjoyed it. So this was a weapon that, because Epic isn't letting me get any footage, I won't be able to show here today, but it's basically like a pocket minigun. I maxed this thing out, dropped one to my friend right away, and Benz and I we had a blast with this thing. Oh my god. If you have a 105 mag size, so you put the mag size perk on there, and then you use the correct hero loadout, link to all my hero loadouts, the playlist in the description below. I will link the soldier video separately because the assault ammo recovery bonus is amazing. So that 24% chance mathematically works out to be about a 31% extra mag size. So you're basically getting, rounding up here, 140 shots in that thing, and it just shreds. It's an amazing weapon. It does have a little bit of a wind up, but it's amazing. And if I'm not mistaken, I've been told this and I haven't disproven it. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know. It is my understanding that this is the highest fire rate ranged weapon in the game. So if I'm wrong, let me know. Regardless, even if it's not the fastest, it is insanely fast. I believe it's 18 before I turn into Sunbeam, and trust me, 16 shots a second is perfectly fast. You're going to have an amazing time using this weapon that is aptly named the Monsoon, because it'll just wash away anything in front of you. I should bring up the typewriter. It deserves its due diligence. It's a weapon that I used to class as one of the best weapons in the game, and I would say that it is. It's a very good weapon, but it sort of falls around the Gravedigger in terms of damage, and the Gravedigger was a weapon that was super good, and then it just kind of got beat out by power creep, and I've experienced the typewriter to be about the same. Fun weapon, great to use, I really love this thing, but it's just not maybe the highest priority. So if you have the weapon, as always, level it up, give it a go. I made mine damage and fire rate because it's about the exact same DPS as crit rating and crit damage, and without crit rating, without fire rate, I'm actually afraid to see. Let's see, what is the base fire rate on this thing? 9. Yeah, I think when I was using this weapon, that felt really slow, and I think when you turn it into Shadow Shard, that goes down by 20%, so whatever 20% of 9 is, that's how low it gets. So damage and fire rate is a much more fun way for me to use this. Of course, as I said, in the playlist for my weapon guides, you can find the best perks on it. I will go way deeper into everything in that video, but for today, I'm just going to say that it's another great weapon that's worth leveling up. I have it maxed out 130 for a reason, even if there may be better options nowadays. And that's pretty much it. So, those are the best SMGs in Save the World. I don't think that there's too much to talk about here. There aren't a ton of SMGs in the game, I don't believe, but the ones that are in the game are just literally some of the strongest weapons in the entire game. And I'm not just like saying literally, I mean, they are like 4 of these SMGs were in my top 10 list. Now these two were tied, so 3 of my top 10 weapons were SMGs, and that's saying something right there. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully you guys learned something new. If I got something wrong, or if you disagree with what I talked about here today, leave a comment in the description below, and I'll be sure to read it there. I actually wish I started recording sooner, because I was scrolling up and down this list looking for the pistols for longer than I'd like to admit. But today we're going to be talking about a surprising response I had to my SMG video, which you should check out in the description below, where more of you than I would have expected voted to make a video on the best pistols. And I say more of you expected as in, I don't know, I didn't expect anybody to leave any kind of recommendation like that, but I'm glad that you guys are enjoying the series, and I'm happy to continue it. So the best pistols, I think, are a fantastic follow-up to the SMG video, and I agree with you guys in that sense, because SMGs, as I mentioned in that video, were mostly all pistols. Like, that was a pistol, whatever. A lot of these were all pistols before, so it kind of makes sense that we talk about what weapons in the game are still pistols and which ones of them are actually worth using. So, as I say with every single video, the Onslaught is just phenomenal. If you haven't used this weapon, then it's basically like the Needler in Halo, but then they brought it to Fortnite. You still can't dual wield it. They patched it after Halo 2. I'm as bummed as you are. But that's basically it. I'm just going to leave that there. Onslaught, all of these weapons that I talk about here today, most of them have their own videos. If they don't have a video, then yell at me in the comments and I'll make it happen when Epic lets me do it. But for now, I will link my playlist in the description below. Then I'll list a video for every single weapon I've covered in the description below right before that playlist. So starting alphabetically, we could talk about the Bald Eagle. The Bald Eagle is one of those weapons that I think is just a fun weapon. It's really not that powerful, but it's the Deagle. I mean, come on, like, they brought it to save the world, and its headshot multiplier is insane before you realize that the damage drop off on a pistol is substantial. So you're not hitting for, I don't know, my perks are all over the place with this, by the way. Don't use that. It's kind of a fun headshot weapon, and it's not that great. The Ghost Pistol is something that I'm going to speak from the group opinion as opposed to my own, because my own is that it's a slow-firing projectile weapon that you have to lead shots, and it's not that great, but it did recently get buffed, and everybody else that's not me that's used it seems to love this thing now. make up your own mind, I'll say, because I think it looks phenomenal. This is a weapon that I bought on vacation when I had like a terrible laptop computer because I was like, I need to have that when I get home. And even after the buff, it's exactly what it says. It's a slow firing pistol. It can shoot through walls, which is useless in Save the World, but kind of a cool feature. And it does a lot more damage apparently. I don't know. I wasn't impressed, but maybe you'll enjoy it more than I did. The Ginger Blaster is by far one of the best pistols in the entire game. I made a video on this recently. It was one of the first weapons I believe I covered in the new Winter 2019 event. It was the first weapon I covered that I hadn't already made a video on, and that's because it's an amazing pistol. What else can I say? If you don't have the Ginger Blaster, perk it up and have a good time. The hot mix, I will happily admit that I am entirely unqualified to speak on. I used this a little bit upon release, and then genuinely I cannot say if this is good or bad, because I really didn't give it the full run of testing. So if anybody really loves this weapon, vouch for it in the comments below, and maybe somebody will have a new toy to play with. Plasmatron 9000 is almost the same story, except that I played with it enough to form an opinion that it is just worth mentioning in a video talking about the best pistols, because I believe that some people regard it to be very, very powerful. I was not impressed by it. I think it is a strong pistol where you can shoot a lot, and seeing as you never have to reload if you use something like the crack shot hero to buff your damage, you can really stack a lot of damage on this thing. But this is a pistol that requires a lot of setup and has a super short range, and there are just so many better options. You know, I was going to slip this clip in here like it was all clean and nonchalant and totally planned out, but I'm not even going to lie to you guys right now. I was rendering my video finding pictures for the thumbnail when it occurred to me that I had completely forgotten to talk about one of my favorite pistols in the entire game. Obviously, that's why it's favorited, but the last word is something that I seriously regret forgetting to mention, because it seriously is one of the top weapons in the entire game. I know in this video I cover most of the pistols and talk about them generally, but this is actually a contender for one of the best pistols. This is my go-to whenever I'm screwing around. I have an entire video explaining these perks, linked below, where I show why I use it the way I do, but I love to just go for the head, shoot with this weapon from the hip. It's got high fire rate from the hip, and then a nice, accurate, slower firing shot when you're aiming down the sights, and this makes it a very versatile weapon, and it looks like a classic 6-shooter pistol. Like, it really is one of my favorite weapons to use, and it's actually one of the better weapons in the entire game. If you haven't tried it out and you've got some decent accuracy, I think you should give this one a go. Moving on to one of the most interesting weapons in the game is the Tiny Instrument of Death, which for a long time was, technically speaking, the only explosive weapon in the game that could be made Shadow Shard. And I say that because it's a pistol. Its class is a pistol. It gets pistol buffs, but it shoots rockets that explode. And you have to guide them in a sort of weird way that it's kind of tough to control. But the proper way to use it is to just run up to an enemy and spam it into their chest and then explode on impact with the right pistol loadout, and it's going to be a very, very, very good time. And it's very funky, and you really have to make it work, and don't you dare use it on a propane. You know what? Go ahead. Use it on a propane zombie and see what happens. Right in the middle of the trap tunnel, too. Your friends are going to love it. The Whisper 45, I mean, you can fight me on this, but I feel like this is, and kind of for a long time has been, the best basic pistol in the game. Meaning, obviously, the Onslaught is its own deal, and the Ginger Blaster is kind of unique. But the Whisper 45 is like the only normal pistol with normal perks that's like, it's a really, really good weapon. It's a suppressed weapon from the military set, which means it has a base 20% crit chance. And maxed out, in the past, I've regarded this as effectively a pistol variant of the Silent Spectre, oh my god, if I could find it. It's basically the pistol version of the Silent Spectre in the respect that it has a 20% crit chance, and then it'll have a really, really nice crit damage, because I think it has a base 75 as well, so it gets boosted really, really high with the correct loadout, which I don't even know what loadout I'm using right now, but it's a really, really good pistol. If you don't have a Whisper 45 leveled up and you enjoy using pistols, this is absolutely something you should check out, and I do have a video on it in the description below. I'm going to gloss over a couple here that I believe should be mentioned, but the Coco 45 is just a really, really fun weapon. The stuff bounces around. What more can I say? And the Bolt is another weapon that somebody wanted me to try out in a recent video, but I don't know. It shoots through enemies. So in the earlier missions, this is a quite fun weapon, seeing as you can get a lot of peers, and it has a decent fire rate and damage and all that, but this is not something that holds up in the late game to my understanding. However, I might try this out in a future date. Again, if this is a weapon you love, let me know in the comments below. And the last fun weapon I want to talk about is the Freedom's Herald. My friend Skulls would tear me a new one if I didn't at least bring this up. This is another weapon that shoots basically a firecracker that explodes on the enemy, and it can do a ton of damage. He likes to run a crit build on this. I don't know that you want to be constantly banking on that. However, in explosive weapons and Save the World, traditionally, crits are based on every enemy hit. So if you shoot an explosive weapon into a crowd of 10 zombies, every one of those 10 zombies will have their own dice roll as to whether or not it crits. So if you want to run a crit build on this and then just have an explosive pistol, you might have a really good time with that. Now, to finish up the video, I want to talk about the last couple amazing weapons here, and that is the Jack's Revenge, which made a huge splash when it first came out because its headshot multiplier is gargantuan, and the people were running crits on this thing, and that just made, oh boy, a huge difference. With a base 15% crit chance, plus its wonky 6 perk, if you use the Corsair sword, I believe it had that chance to, you know, on crit, increase headshot damage on the pistols, so you could use these two in conjunction with each other to do some wicked damage. This was one of those weapons that was hitting for the millions back when that was hard to do. I'm looking at you, Wrath. And the pistol it's again, very good to use. The damage drop off is pretty significant, but when you're headshotting for the hundreds of thousands without much of a bonus, I think you're going to like what it does. And that's it for the Jack's Revenge. What more can I say? I think its reputation speaks for itself. And the last one that I'm going to be mentioning here today is the Founders Revolt, which I'm pretty sure everybody knew was coming. Classic old weapon that the Founders get. I don't know what version of the game you need it. Maybe people in the comments can let me know. But I made mine Obsidian because, don't ask, I don't know why. You could only make it purple, which is one of the reasons a lot of people in the higher end kind of forget that it exists. But it's also an extremely powerful weapon that holds up even as a purple weapon. Again, my perks are kind of weird. I wasn't really trying that hard with this. In fact, I made it purple perks just to match the rarity there. But the Founders Revolt has an extremely unique 6 perk where the bullet's chained to nearby targets, and that makes it an extremely powerful area of effect pistol. So if you want to just spam this into a crowd, it's an extremely fun one to use. And if I'm not mistaken, oh, it's not locked to nature. I don't know why I had that in my head, but you can put any element on it. I would recommend energy because it's the best all around. I'll link my elements video in the description below if you want more on that topic. But those are my picks for the best pistols in Fortnite Save the World. Again, a lot of my old picks have become SMGs, and I haven't used every pistol in the game, so there are weapons like the Falcon and the Judge, which is my understanding to be worse versions of the Bald Eagle. I might be totally wrong on that. The Krypton pistol and the Vindertech Blaster, or Burst, or whatever you want to call it, are two weapons that I believe have deserved my attention in the past, but again, I'm not qualified to speak on them. So, hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Again, I'm surprised you guys wanted to see the best pistols so soon. This was on my list because I want to cover all the best weapon types in the game, but pistols are kind of a forgotten about section of the game, especially since all of the best pistols just became SMGs, so it's kind of like we're digging in the back of the attic for what's left in the pistol section, but there are quite a lot of fun options here and really interesting traits. I mean, we got a sound blaster, we've got a bubble gun, this thing drops healing drops, this thing shoots to the... All the pistols have their own unique flavors, and most of them are very powerful. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Check out some of the videos linked in the description below. I do make a lot of Save the World content. If you want to see more of that, hit subscribe. Alright, don't bother grabbing a snack. This is going to be a quick conversation. The Wrath is the only thing worth using, but if you really want to, the Deatomizer and the Santa's Little Helper are amazing, and if you can deal with the damage, the Metal Marauder is also technically better than the Santa's Little Helper, but dangerous to use. Thank you guys for watching, and have a nice day. Alright, fine. I know, that was cruel. Let's talk about the rest of them, because launchers are some of the most fun weapons in the entire game, and boy do they pack a punch. In my top 10 weapons video, where I covered the best weapons in the entire game in terms of meta relevance, meaning these are the strongest weapons that the highest level players use in the hardest missions, the launchers were crowned amongst them as the strongest weapons in the entire game, because I think they just are. And now that they have an actual ammo type, many of the launchers got a huge durability buff and can shoot almost, I think, tens or if not dozens or hundreds of shots before breaking, so now they are actually affordable to the common folk. So rockets are now not only buffed, but as good as they ever were, so let's get into that right now. I wasn't kidding right off the bat. The Wrath is just not even fair. This thing is stupid. It crits for millions without even a buff. It's at a laser beam. Use it if you got it. I mean, see you later. But the Deatomizer is one of those amazing weapons that shoots in an area of effect. It's really good, but it lacks the range and impact power to really stand up to the Santa's Little Helper and Metal Marauder, and these two weapons basically trade blows just like I said. Santa's Little Helper I think is best all around, but the Metal Marauder has a little bit of a hit to the reload, and that damage is fake because its 5th perk gives more damage based on your health, so it can do much more than the Santa's Little Helper, but as I said, it takes away your health, so it's a very dangerous thing to use, and its impact is staggering. But I'm so sorry for that. but it's a very, it's got a high impact, which is even higher than the Santa's Little Helper, and that's saying something because this thing was insanely high for any weapon. 25,000 is a ton, but it doesn't look like much sitting next to the Metal Marauder, and that's why these 4 launchers are basically the only 4 that anybody talks about. But there are other launchers, so what I want to talk about is a couple of honorable mentions, and that's the Bazooka and the Jackal launcher. So there is a legitimate tier list. The Santa's Little Helper, I think I explained it more in my Santa's Little Helper video. I'll show the graphic if I can find it, but it just does more damage than the Bazooka, and the Bazooka does more damage than the Jackal launcher. It's not really a subjective opinion here. There is a legitimate tier list where one is better than the other. And that's where the Jackal launcher is a fun weapon from the event, but it's really not a good launcher. And the Bazooka, I think, is fantastic for base game, but it is dwarfed by the Santa's Little Helper. Like, it's just not even close. The weapons, like, when the Santa's Little Helper came out, I had a Bazooka for every single element: energy, fire, nature, water, physical. When the Santa's Little Helper came out and somebody showed me how strong it was, I got rid of the other schematics because I didn't need those anymore. So it is a fantastic weapon if you have no other choice, but seeing as I'm recording this in late December of 2019, the Santa's Little Helper should be making a return. So if you're watching this in 2020, leave a comment. Santa's Little Helper is hopefully still a great weapon a year from now, but nonetheless, the Bazooka is a fantastic choice. Moving on to some more unconventional approaches, I'm going to actually take a trip down to the collection book while I'm talking here and bring up something that I should mention if I'm going to be talking about the subject, and that is the Noble Launcher. It is not my cup of tea. That's why it's in the collection book. But it basically just shoots through structures in a wide arc that hits a lot of enemies, and some people value that. I think that unless you're just sitting in front of a trap tunnel watching the enemies die, there's not really a lot of value in that. And, I mean, if you're using a melee loadout, the Ravager basically does that with its charged attack anyway. So, I don't like the Noble Launcher, but I will respect it as an option, seeing as I know a lot of people enjoy it, and there are some very valid reasons to use it. I would recommend it, genuinely. If you have the Noble Launcher, try it out, make your own opinion. I'd say give it all damage. I don't think something like that needs crit, because you're not shooting it very often, and just have some fun with it, because like I said, launchers are only going to get crazier as we talk, and that's why I'm going to talk about the Bowler and the Jabberwocky. These are two weapons that I am just embarrassed to not have any gameplay footage for. I'll try to see if my animation department can show this. So the Bowler shoots a projectile that goes into a crowd of zombies, and it's basically like you're bowling. I'll show a video of a bowling happening right now, a nice little strike, so you can see how that works. The Jabberwocky basically does the same thing, except that it explodes at the end. And that's it. I mean, the Jabberwocky literally needed to be nerfed. So if that speaks to how strong it used to be, and kind of still is, it's basically the Bowler but it explodes, and it's a very, very fun thing to use. That's not extremely controllable, and it's kind of tough to use in a normal mission, but again, if you haven't leveled these weapons up, make an afternoon out of it. You're going to enjoy it. And now I want to talk about something that giggles when you shoot it, and that's the Snowball Launcher. That's it. It giggles while you shoot it. Not very strong. It's basically just a winterized thumper, which is like the grenade launcher from BR. If I can actually go to my ranged weapons, you can see that that is a weapon in this game. Nobody uses it for a good reason. It's not very strong. It has the element water, but by no means does that make it a snowball launcher, because it doesn't actually shoot snowballs. It's a fun weapon, and then of course the Easter egg launcher is basically its Easter doppelganger with a rabbit that really wants you to know what's going on, and it shoots landmines that explode when stuff walks over it. It's a fun weapon. I mean, it's a common theme here, but you know what I'm saying at this point. From there are only a few more things to talk about, and I'll gloss over the Deciblaster because I have basically never used it. I do know that the vacuum tube launcher is a pretty decent weapon from back in the day, but I don't think it holds up to today's standards, and the old Impact King is the Dam Buster. I don't have it because it's not that good. Its reload is abysmal, and its damage doesn't hold up to today's standards. Its impact is dwarfed by Santa's Little Helper. Do you see the common theme here? They introduced a very powerful rocket, and a lot of stuff got the back seat. But the Dam Buster, if you have it, it's okay if you don't have a ton of options, but I would recommend a Cannonade because it compares in no way, and this weapon is it's a low damage crowd clearer. I made a video on it. I'll link in the description below. I go way in more depth on that. The only thing different with that video is the current durability perks. As I said, it got buffed, but the rest of that information is clean. It's basically a weapon that's good for the lower levels. You know, it's good for clearing crowds, but it's not good for much else. And the V6 launcher is kind of a hybrid, meaning it's a nice fast fire rate rocket where you can get off a lot of shots, but its damage is not exactly anything to write home about, so you should probably keep seeing her in private and don't even tell your parents about her. And then that leads me to the quad launcher, which again, I made another video on this, which was basically much more in-depth about this, but the only thing unique about the quad launcher is the fact that it leaves a pool of fire for enemies to walk into, which is super unique and one of my favorite things. I would use this far more if the weapon just didn't, it just does like no damage. This damage is basically a lie because most of the DPS that comes out of this weapon is from those pools of fire, but it just needs a damage buff. And I feel so bad saying that because if this weapon, leave it the same in every way, they give it more damage to hold up to, you know, some of the higher end enemies, I would use the quad launcher a lot. I think it's a very fun weapon to use, and I think it would hold up because that's kind of a neat trait to have. But unfortunately, we are in a state of things where we have like 4 rockets that are insane and everything else is kind of meh. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Nice little sit-down chat with some of the most unique launchers in the game. I don't think I covered everything, but I think I covered everything worth talking about. Obviously, in the first 30 seconds, you heard what you needed to hear. So if you guys have anything else to add, let me know in the comments below. I want to hear about your stories and your favorite launchers. We don't need to necessarily talk about stats here because it's not all about that, you know, with this game. There are a lot of very funky launchers, and you can tell that the devs took a lot of liberties with some of the launchers in this game. This is where they took their creativity to the limit and just made some really, really funky stuff, and I appreciate that part of the game. Today we're going to be talking about the best shotguns in Fortnite Save the World. This is probably one of the most looked forward to episodes that I'm going to make. The rocket launcher video is kind of a peak. I get everybody wanted rocket launchers, but you know what rocket launchers and shotguns have in common? There are a lot of them, and every single one of them are entirely unique, and they both go boom. So I'm going to start right up at the top of the list with the black drum. And before I get into that, I do want to say that if you don't see your favorite shotgun here, I do want to give a little caveat to these videos, and that's that everything here is obviously a bit opinion-based, but I have been playing for a long time, and I consider myself a fairly analytical person, so when I talk about these weapons, it's usually with a lot of math behind it, and I try to explain myself as clearly as possible, but if I mention something here that you don't agree with, or if I don't bring something up that you think should have been mentioned, let me know in the comments below, and let's get right into it. So, the black drum shotgun is probably one of the most powerful shotguns to be added in recent time, and in my opinion is one of the strongest weapons in the game. In fact, I believe I ranked it pretty high on my top 10 list, which I'll link below, and I will have links to all of the shotguns that I've made videos on here as well. And if I haven't covered a shotgun in this video, let me know because I do plan to fill in a lot of gaps on these weapons. So if you want to see a shotgun first, you know, before I make a video on something else, let me know in the comments below. The black drum shotgun shoots 2 shots at a time, so every time you pull the trigger, and it is part of the black metal set. So it has that 6th perk where in my case, stunning or knocking back an enemy reduces my health and then deals damage based off of that. But I believe that there are other options for the black drum. It might be like, you know, reloading or 3 kills or 1 kill. The black metal weapons have a few of those different triggers, and it is a very, very powerful attribute because coupled with its 5th perk, adding 80% bonus damage based on the percentage of your missing health means that you can be doing a ton of extra damage depending on how much health you have, and that's why I rank this as one of the best weapons in the game. If you want to know the best perks, link below. The double boiler is another one of the best weapons in the entire game. Like, seriously, weapons, not just shotguns. This thing hits, I believe it's something like the Stalwart Squire, where it hits for 80k, and I'm not even sure that I have a shotgun loadout on. In fact, I'm going to go put that on right now, and this will give you a little bit of a teaser as to the shotgun loadout that I use. There is a lot more to say on this, and I do so in the shotgun video in the description below. This is a very good loadout, but obviously if you want to know every angle regarding that situation and why I use the heroes that I do and what you could use as alternatives, that's a video that you're going to want to check out. But with the correct hero loadout, this thing hits for over 100,000 damage without even anybody in my party. That is more than enough to kill any normal zombie. Not to mention it has Pierce, and it has the Steampunk 6th perk where on hit the bullets splinter, dealing extra damage to the enemies behind it. This is one of those shotguns that benefits heavily from headshot damage, and then of course if you put crit damage on it, this thing has the potential to hit like a truck, and all of that coupled with the fact that it has a really decent range makes this one of my favorite shotguns to use because it's such a powerhouse. And the ground pounder is one of my favorite shotguns to talk about in terms of being a normal shotgun. The ground pounder is, I'll admit, nothing special in any regard other than that it's just kind of a really decent powered, high fire rate shotgun with a decent enough reload to keep you in the action. And that's pretty much it for the ground pounder. It's very good. I highly recommend it. If you've got it, level it up. It's in the military set, so you can pull it right out of the collection book. You can recruit it right now. I believe it's going to cost you the new manuals or whatever. And coupled with the ground pounder, I'm actually going to talk about a couple others. And that's the Huskbuster and the Stampede, which are technically speaking the same weapon. In fact, if I can grab a non-130 here, you'll see that when I compare these two, they should have identical stats. So yeah, the Huskbuster is one of those weapons where it's actually a scavenger version of another shotgun, and there is one more example of it that I'm going to show here, and that's the Old Smoky compared to the Thunderbolt. These are the same weapon, like they're just the same weapon, except that the scavenger weapons are a little bit cheaper. And I will admit, I've done the math, so I can say if I'm wrong, let me know. But the one time I did the math, the durability, it does get better. Like, this is a more efficient use of your resources. So if you have a scavenger weapon, they are almost always better. But if you don't care about cost and you just hate crafting, then you can definitely just use the normal weapon. But that's where, like I said, the Old Smoky, the Thunderbolt, and then the Stampede and the Huskbuster, they're just the same weapon. So I'll be talking about them sort of as interchangeably. And so to go along with the ground pounder, the Huskbuster is about 15% less damage. You can double check my math. I think I was pretty okay with that one. It's basically just a weaker ground pounder, and as I said, the Stampede does the same damage, so it's not really an alternative there. But you'll see that my elements here are kind of lining up with the pop shot. So this is where I consider these three weapons to be almost the same. I mean, the pop shot might be a little bit stronger, but it doesn't have the 45% damage, and then this one does. So they all kind of just, pick up where the other left off. So if you have the Huskbuster or the ground pounder or the pop shot's in the game right now with the 2019 winter event, you can definitely pick it up right now. Definitely a good weapon. I've heard some people disagree with that, but I don't know, 60,000 damage, a really, really fast reload time, and just a really good potential to crit. The 6th perk is useless. You should be aiming for the head in general, but that is just not gonna help you that much, I don't think. But if you're spraying into the crowd, maybe you can pick up an extra 30% damage. I find this to be a very fun weapon and a very powerful one to boot. So of course I couple it with these other two, and these are just three very good general shotguns. I use the elements to just sort of pick up the slack. The Pulsar 9000 was one of those weapons that's one of my favorites to talk about. In fact, this is a weapon I thought was garbage for a very long time. This is why I'm open to opinions, you guys, because I don't know everything. Nobody knows everything on this game. The Pulsar 9000, I used it day one and was just disgusted by the range of this thing. But after getting used to the Black Drum and the fact that weapon has a very low effective range, the Pulsar 9000 just impressed the hell out of me. This thing has no benefit from headshot damage, and it just cleans up crowds in front of you. Huge thanks to Benz for getting all the gameplay in today's video, and you can just see that this is a shotgun where if you're going to be doing encampments, it will just delete everything in front of you, and it crits hard enough to do enough damage to smashers. So it's truly an all-around weapon, and I had comments on my top 10 video where this one placed very high, where people argued that it should have been in the #1 slot, and I can't say that I entirely disagree, but I would never put such a short-range weapon at the very top there. There are weapons that deserve that #1 slot. Regardless, the Pulsar 9000 might very well be the strongest shotgun in the game. And that segues me pretty nicely to the Stalwart Squire, who, technically speaking, holds that title, but I'm going to let you guys decide that one on your own. This weapon is an extreme example where with a 15% base crit chance, you can run a crit rating perk on this maxed out. You can get a 43% crit chance, and with all three crit damage perks, you can hit for a lot. I think it's like 630% crit damage, and that is just a powerhouse. In fact, if you use the Buckshot Raptor as your lead, that can be like 800% crit damage, and you can hit for over 1 million. I would never recommend that, and that's why I say that it's technically the strongest shotgun in the game, but that's so impractical. Every 1.5 seconds, you'll be hitting for at least 100,000, I mean, typically, but most often you're going to basically be hitting for that 100,000, and only sometimes will you be hitting for 800,000, which or 1 million or more, which is absurd because no zombie needs that unless you're hitting mist monsters, and if you're attacking mist monsters and smashers, you're probably going to want something a little bit more consistent that's not shooting once every 1.5 seconds. And again, to get that kind of crit damage, you're going to have to roll some heavy crit intensive perks, and with the Stalwart Squire, that's where you might want to just take off one of those crit damages and put on like a reload to get more shots off, or I don't know. It's one of those fun weapons that's technically great, but it has some drawbacks. Not to mention, it's extremely expensive. So most shotguns in the game, most weapons, most shotguns have like a 900 durability. I mean, you'll get about 900 to 1200 shots before it breaks, which is about how much ammo you can hold. The Stalwart Squire has a 1-to-1 durability use, meaning every single shot that durability is going to go down by 1. So if you roll Shadow Shard on this thing, which you should for pretty much all weapons, you will get about 300 shots, which is so low. So on top of this thing being just a crit powerhouse and an extremely expensive weapon, I would never recommend it, but it is definitely up here as a technical outlier and something that you should probably try out yourself. That said, when getting gameplay for this footage, Benz and I were both quite impressed with how well it performed, even with many of its drawbacks. The Room Sweeper and the Tiger Jaw are two classic shotguns that just, I love it. I love it because they trade blows as two of the best, most like average shotguns in the game. They're both base game. You can pick them up right from the store, or right from the collection book, I should say. And they basically just trade blows. Where the Room Sweeper lacks damage, it picks up in fire rate and mag size. And I do have mine perked a little bit funky here, so it's not a perfect comparison. Fire rate and damage do equal out to crit rate and crit damage. It's identical DPS. You can fight me on it. The math says otherwise. And I prefer fire rate and damage on the Room Sweeper simply because it just gets so many shots off so fast. It makes it an extremely fun weapon to use. However, your average damage per bullet goes down, so I find myself crafting more of these than I'd like to think, but it's not a weapon I use seriously. I pretty much just pull it out for fun. And the Tiger Jaw is more of a slower firing, harder hitting weapon, so it's probably the more practical weapon of these two. And like I said, they're both just interchangeable, extremely good weapons. Base game, so you probably already have a schematic if you don't even know it, and it's just, it's just a good couple weapons here. The Staccato Shadow is another one like the Black Drum that came out relatively recently. I believe it was, when did the sound weapons come out? And it came out with the Woofer, which I'll be getting to in a second, because that's another weapon that impressed me. But the Staccato Shadow is a shotgun that basically plays like an AR. I don't know if Ben's got any footage of this, but it does have a really good range, an extremely good effective range, meaning like the Black Drum I mentioned has a low effective range, where it can hit from far away, but you're going to be hitting for so little that you might as well have not even pulled the trigger. The Staccato Shadow shoots through enemies, makes them dance in the process, and you have a 5th perk where you can buff the damage to dancing enemies, which I'm going to just switch to right now because that is definitely the preferred way to go. If you can get some dancing enemies on the field, you're going to be doing 60% extra damage towards them, which is twice as much as my damage perk from before, and it's just a great all-around weapon. Truly one of my favorite shotguns. It's not got a ton of damage on its own, but it shoots fast enough and has a big enough magazine size to absolutely counteract that, and it's a great crowd clearer and a great weapon to use. Again, I feel like this thing seriously should have been classed as more of an AR because of the range that this thing has, so use it before they patch it, friends. And I'm going to skip over a couple here just for the Woofer, and that is a shotgun that I truly did not give my most attention towards. In fact, a lot of you guys backed up the Hot Mix pistol, which came from the sound set, which I too admitted that I was frankly just unqualified to talk about. It didn't seem that good, and then I kind of just set it down on day one, but plenty of you guys told me that it's definitely worth picking back up, and that's something I'm going to say for the Woofer, because while getting gameplay for this, Benz and I were both just impressed by how much damage it did. It hits kind of like the Pulsar 9000, honestly. I don't know if it's quite as powerful. I truly have not been able to play enough to actually compare the two, but it is definitely something worth checking out. If you haven't tried this weapon out, then yeah, I'm making quite the list for you guys to try out these weapons, because a lot of them are better than you might think. And skipping over the bear, we're gonna go back to it. This is another weapon that I thought was terrible for the longest time, and I don't know why I wouldn't. It's a very, it's a pump fire shotgun that only shoots every like second or less, and it's not that impressive in that regard, but if you're using this just for fun and as a normal shotgun, it actually hits decently hard, over 100k per shot, and then if you put fire rate and damage on this, you'll be getting a lot more shots off. Again, for a weapon shooting like once every second, or less than that even if you're going to have fire rate not on there, once every 1.5 seconds or more, crit rate and crit damage is not what you want to do. You're not going to be critting enough. It's not going to be worth it. If you get 4 or 5 shots off in a row that don't crit and you're shooting that slow, you're dead. I mean, you're just not going to make it. So I highly recommend for a slow firing weapon like this, fire rate and damage to smoothen everything out. And it does have a pretty decent arc where it can hit a lot of enemies at once, and it's more of just a fun weapon. You guys know I like to use that term a lot because I feel like there are a lot of weapons in this game that deserve our attention and deserve to be leveled up and tried out, but if you're going to be talking about the best shotgun in the game and you're playing in a 144 player, don't use the bear. That pretty much wraps it up for all of the absolute best shotguns in the game. I do have a lot of weapons here that I sort of want to continue talking about, but If I haven't leveled it up, it's usually not great. And that's not to sound conceited. It just means that I try to keep a good understanding of the best shotguns in the game, and I try to prioritize the best ones first. And that's something that I'm going to talk about here. And like the backbreaker, for example, I wanted to give this shotgun another go. And I'm going to bring it up just because of this little story where this was one of the first weapons that was ever handed to me by Exortion when power level 90 was huge for me. I was back in Stonewood. He handed me a max out backbreaker, and that was like my favorite thing for a while. Of course, you hand a 130 to a Stonewood player and it's going to destroy anything, but I forever thought that this was like a weapon I should be going for, and no offense to Exortion, but I think his pick there might have been a little bit misguided because it's not that good. In fact, this was one of the weapons where when getting gameplay for this, Ben straight up put it away and just he just played with something else entirely. And it's something you might want to try out if you're low level, but I would not recommend it as a priority. And another weapon that happened with was, I believe, the Thunderbolt, where the Thunderbolt and the Dragoon. I don't have the Dragoon here today. It's in the collection book, but it's basically like the Thunderbolt. In fact, it's like a 1 or 2 shot weapon that shoots in a very close range, wide arc, and has a high impact. It can knock enemies back and stagger them like crazy. But that's basically it. It's like a walking wall launcher. I was not convinced that the damage was at all good. I know a lot of people have wanted me to make a video on these two weapons, actually, but I'm just not convinced that that's exactly something worth using there. If you disagree, let me know in the comments below. Like I said, it's like a walking wall launcher. It's more of a support weapon than anything. And, you know, I'm going to leave that one up to you guys. And the Dragon's Might is a shotgun that isn't even really a shotgun. It's mostly like a... Well, it's like a blunderbuss, not the bundle bus. I mean, it's literally like a blunderbuss. Like, you just launch a bunch of fireworks outside of this weapon. It shoots like 5 at a time, and it's actually pretty powerful for what's meant to be sort of a silly Chinese New Year weapon. Really good crowd clear. The Roman Candle can be a very, very fun 6th perk. It is unique to the Chinese New Year weapons, so I believe the Dragon's Roar, the Dragon's Might, some of the other Chinese New Year weapons might have that, but it's a fun weapon to use. Definitely worth trying out. I don't have one leveled up right now because it's not good necessarily, but it's something to pull out if you're bored watching enemies die at your Storm Shield. An honorable mention before I get to the true last weapon is the vacuum tube shotgun, and that's one that I don't even think we got gameplay for, but I did have a little bit of fun with this and some certain, like the hit the road and the dungeons where I ended up having the vacuum tube shotgun. Again, this is a weapon that I'm frankly unqualified to speak on. It's a weapon I have not used much. It's definitely an interesting weapon, and with all vacuum tube weapons, it's locked in nature, so this might be something I'll try out in the future. It has the potential to be very good, but I'm going to leave that one as a wild card to you guys. If you haven't tried it out, let me know. And if you think it's a great weapon, again, let me know in the comments below. Let's move on to the worst shotgun that I'm going to talk about today, and that's the weapon that I don't even have on me. So we're going to take a trip all the way over to the Neon set, and that is the helium shotgun. I hate to frame it like this, because I know that this is some people's favorite weapon, like for shotguns, but it just... Oh man, in all of the weapons we were trying, this was like the one true weapon where Ben's, in the middle of his gameplay, put the helium shotgun away, said, fuck this weapon, and just moved on to the next one because it shoots very slow projectile, so a very slow fire rate, and then a slow projectile that just kind of doesn't do that much damage, and its crowd clearing was nothing to write home about. So I'm mentioning this weapon simply because of its infamy and how much it's been brought up in my comments, but I cannot give it my stamp of approval. If somebody can shoot some gameplay or show me a loadout, you know, link it in our Discord, link below. I would love to take a second look at the shotgun, but I'm simply not convinced that it's worth mine or anybody else's time. So, oh boy, first year of 2020. Whew, I'm glad that that break is over. Today we're going to be starting off the year pretty strong with one of the biggest topics that I'm going to be covering in a while. Recently, I've been covering all of the best weapons in Fortnite Save the World, so I'll link pretty much all of those videos in the description below if you guys are curious, but quite a few of you, rightfully so, have been asking about traps, and that is quite the topic in and of itself, and so let's just get right into it. So, to make this future-proof, oh god, if that's even possible, I'm going to try to cover traps as they are best known / before the recent changes. Meaning, recently, Epic made some pretty massive changes with floor launchers no longer affecting smashers, wall launchers being much less effective against smashers, gas traps no longer dealing affliction damage. There have been a lot of changes to these different traps, but I still think the actual, you know, like usefulness of these traps and tier lists, if you will, are still kind of intact, meaning like the gas trap, even with its nerf, is still amazingly powerful, and I'll be talking about the traps and their usefulness separate from the recent changes, so that this will be a useful guide for anything to come. And I'll try to comment below and pin something if anything here changes that is major. So we're probably going to be going alphabetical here, because right off the bat is one of the recent changes that was, in my opinion, one of the better trap changes, and probably the only good one, seeing as every other change was a nerf to traps. The anti-air trap replaced patrol wards and is now our trophy system in Fortnite Save the World, and it does exactly what you'd think. It completely disables lobbers. Flingers are still throwing enemies right past anti-air traps, but propanes, if I do understand correctly, also get destroyed by these. So just an awesome trap to spam around. With the current perk loadout, I'll be linking all of my best perks videos in the description below. What I show isn't always the full picture, so those are definitely worth checking out if you're curious. With the arming delay and reload time, it's about 6.4 seconds between shots, so if you're kind of working with their own flaws, you're going to want about 7 of these to ensure permanent uptime, and they're just a great trap to spam around your base if you don't want the lobbers to get in your way. Now, the broadside is another one that's interesting, because I think the tar pit was the most recent one before the anti-air trap. Not like it matters. The broadside is relatively new in the grand scheme of things, because the core base game traps have been remained unchanged for quite a while, seeing as, like, just on a tangent here, the gas trap, all the electric stuff, you know, the floor launcher, wall launcher, like, I'm pretty sure all of these have been in here for a very long time that I'm hovering over. But, you know, we got some newer additions within the last, like, 8 months or so. The sound wall, broadside, yada, yada, yada. The broadside is, in my opinion, but pretty truthfully, the strongest wall trap in the game. There are lots of extremely useful wall traps, like the wall darts, the wall lights, the sound wall. We'll get into all those later on, but the broadside is like the best for just dealing a huge amount of damage very, very quickly. It shoots 5 projectiles that bounce off the wall across from it, and that can just cripple even the strongest enemies in the entire game. If Benz didn't get some footage of this, I will show my own footage of taking down a 116 mini boss in like one shot with like 3 of these, and it's just an amazingly powerful trap to spam along the walls of your traps if you're trying to do some heavy damage. Note, oh my god, I'm going to help out a lot of the bros here. If you don't have a wall on the other side of your broadside, what are you doing? If it doesn't have something to bounce off of, this thing is almost useless. So just, please, for the life of everybody, if you're playing in a public mission especially, put a wall for them to bounce off of. For the gas traps, we're basically going to talk about them kind of in congruence with the floor spikes, because they kind of go like 2 peas in a pod. The gas trap is, as I mentioned, probably just the strongest trap in the game. In fact, in the past, I've said that it's probably the strongest weapon in the game. Obviously, it's doing less damage than most weapons that you can shoot with your character, but the fact that it's completely autonomous and will just keep acting even when you're not there without any fear of an enemy killing it, you know, other than its own durability or propanes or smashers when it's not supported by much, it is just packing an insane punch. So even without the affliction damage, oh, they should probably update that description. It's just an extremely good ceiling trap, and because of the gas trap, I'm not really going to be covering the ceiling zapper or the ceiling electric field much at all here, because they're just kind of weaker versions that zap kind of regularly, but the zapper can do a lot of damage, but it's just not, I've never found a situation where I need these traps. Like, I'm not going to argue with anybody that these are bad. I'd say they're very good, but, you know, when you have the gas trap, there's just no reason to use these, and I've never found a situation where, like I said, I absolutely needed them, so I'm kind of going to skip over these. And I say the floor spikes in congruence because floor spikes only have one purpose, and that's to slow enemies down. It doesn't really matter how you perk them in that sense, so long as you have gas traps on the ceiling, you should probably have floor spikes on the floor. The only alternative to that is usually the tar pit. I'm going to skip over the retractable floor spikes because it's kind of just another situation where floor spikes, the wooden ones, are great for slowing everything down and letting like broadsides and gas traps do the damage, whereas the retractable floor spikes, I don't actually know how a maxed out 130 variant of this does, but I've never really been convinced that it's quite that useful, seeing as I've never seen anybody use it, and I think it's kind of a trap that needs a buff, or at least multiple elements, because physical is kind of a drawback. That being said, you know, the gas trap's physical, but the gas trap has the damage that the retractable floor spikes are missing, so it's either a buff or an element. I mean, something epic. Give us a reason to use the retractable floor spike. But the other floor trap that's amazingly useful is the tar pit, and that's kind of an interesting one. You typically want to just roll all durability on this because it lasts so little, and it's great for 2 main reasons. Well, 3, I guess, technically. So, one is just mini bosses, and then the second one is smashers. I mean, you just they stop them in their tracks, and it's extremely powerful. If they haven't changed anything, it is my understanding that it can stop a smasher in full charge. If that's not true, let me know in the comments below. I haven't personally used the tar pit trap too much, but I do understand its power and usefulness, and I say the third option is just kind of a replacement to floor spikes. If you're trying to stall as much as possible, aka Frostnite 2019 AO, then you're going to want to be spamming tar pits everywhere to make sure everything is frozen in place for as long as possible. And it's kind of just an interesting alternative. Again, it's more of like a min-max situation where you're using this in extremely niche situations, and I would recommend the floor spikes for pretty much any other time. We're going to talk about the wall spikes, which has an actually interesting niche where I think I have some old footage of my Ice King video actually, where these can be used to, you know, reflect the damage of an enemy back onto themselves, and that's where most of the damage actually comes from, I think. If that's how that works, maybe if I'm wrong, let me know in the comments below, but that's how I've observed it to work, and it's just kind of a powerful trap to use in that ice castle build. But I've never really found a situation where you need that. If you're building in a very high power, high level mission, sound walls are great to stop them from attacking. Wall launchers are great to push them back into the tunnel. Even a broadside is great to just do, you know, more damage than a wall spike would do. But it has its uses. And then to keep with the wall theme, let's go to the wall lights, which is just a fantastic trap for stunning stuff into place. What more can I say? I mean, it stops them in their tracks. It's kind of like the tar pit, but on the wall. Just kind of nice to have. Again, I'll be skipping over the wall dynamo because it's basically just a slower hitting nature version of the broadside. It can be good, no doubt, especially in a water mission, but again, once the broadside came out, the wall dynamo definitely took a backseat for me. The sound wall is basically, as I said, very simple, not much to talk about here. It just makes enemies dance in place. I do not think my perks are even good here. Again, this is not something I've tried out a ton. It's, you know, it's useful, but it's not something you need necessarily. In most missions, even the 144 players, non-event missions I should state, it does what it does. It's nice to have, but it's really not a big deal. In fact, in lazy missions where we're not really trying, my friends and I will just spam sound walls surrounding the entire structure just to, I don't know, make them start dancing instead of attacking the structure. What's extremely useful and hands down my most favorite wall trap, including the broadside, is the wall launcher, because the wall launcher, if used correctly, simply just pushes enemies either off the map for a one-hit kill or back into your trap tunnels to double, triple, or even quadruple their time inside of a tunnel. I say that because I've observed in the past slow enough smashers, which when pricked by floor spikes that actually slow them down and snare them, which stacks on top of slowed and snared perks, which mean your hero and your weapon separately, you can almost freeze an enemy with that, just saying. When it's affected by a floor spike, I've seen enemies, you know, like a smasher, go through a trap tunnel up to 4 or more times. By that time they're usually dead. The wall launcher just keeps them inside of the tunnel for much longer, and, you know, it's not exactly doing damage itself, but it's making them spend so much more time inside the tunnel that not only does it delay their effectiveness in actually getting to your base, but it makes them spend more time in the tunnel, dealing more damage. It is just a fantastic support trap, where many newer players might not care about this. I didn't for the longest time, but then I got better at building trap tunnels, and I realized that the wall launcher is secretly one of the best traps in the entire game. And so was the floor launcher before the nerf. It's only, you know, redeemable quality was one-hitting smashers in the highest level zones by killing them with their own weight. Like I said, with recent changes, that's kind of not a thing anymore, and they're just kind of, I don't know. I don't think they're that useful, personally. You might have a better opportunity for it. I know that they can be used just like wall launchers to fling stuff off to the side and off the map and into death pits. I mentioned all of that in my floor launcher video in the description below. I'm just still not convinced that this is something you really need from normal missions. What you do need, if you take a lot of damage, is a campfire. And the campfire I mentioned because the other healing trap, I don't even know what it's called, to be completely honest. It's just kind of a much weaker version, much more expensive version than a campfire. I've seen the healing pad maxed out with all healing, do next to no health at all, and the campfire is extremely cheap materials. We spam them down. You can't get healed by more than 2 of these at once anymore. Flashback to my old video healing from 16 of these at a time. It's still very, very effective even with just 2 of these. I use these in the Storm King fights all the time. I did mention that the wall darts were actually pretty good as well, and they're basically like the broadside, but they do have quite a distance, so I believe they trigger at up to like 3 tiles or more, and then they shoot like 4 or 5 tiles in effective damage. So wall darts are a fantastic thing to use when I used to play Exploding Death Burst missions. Now they've been changed to Exploding Death Bomb, where the fatties and the riot shielders, and I think the propanes all drop a bomb when they, I hate that modifier. If Epic could remove anything. I don't queue missions with Death Bomb, but if there's a very good reward and we really want to weather the storm, we use constructors. But wall darts are a great option because they die far enough from the build to not actually do any damage. That doesn't always work in exact theory, but it is kind of a nice thing to have. Like I said, I love the wall darts. They're great. Shout out to Donna, a friend of mine, and she just loves the wall darts. But it's not, if you can use the wall darts, you can probably get away with the broadside. And that pretty much covers all of the best traps in Fortnite Save the World. There aren't too many like meta relevant ones to talk about. Obviously, the Defender post is a very unique thing that's technically classed as a trap. Defenders are great. I use sniper defenders all the time, but I believe that defenders are their entire own other video if you really wanted to get down that rabbit hole. So to mention everything I didn't talk about, I don't usually do this for normal weapons, but I believe that there are few enough traps to where I could get this out of the way pretty quickly. Boost pads are just for fun. Player jump pads are just to send your friends off the map. Jump pads are nice. They're nice. I don't know why we don't use them more. But the floor freeze and the flame girl trap, you can see I have them favorited because I've always wanted to try these out. But the flame girl trap is basically like the tar pit, but it doesn't freeze them in place. Seeing as when you shoot the tar pit, it actually burns up the enemies, and that's where a lot of our durability goes. It's just kind of good for nature missions if you want something unique, and the floor freeze trap is actually quite effective in my experience. Again, as I always say, it might not be that needed. I've never needed a floor freeze trap. I've never lost a mission and thought, gosh, I wish I had a floor freeze trap. I have lost missions and wished I spammed gas traps. You see the difference? But it is something that's extremely useful because when they are frozen, they do take more damage. So if you really have hard enemies that you're trying to kill, the floor freeze could come in clutch, and it's definitely something worth leveling up. And that just about covers all the traps in Fortnite Save the World. All of the best ones, I should say. I mean, a lot of the traps are extremely useful in this game, and I love that about this game. Traps are some of the most interesting things in the entire game, and I really do feel like a lot of the lower level players don't fully understand them because how would you? Some of them are very, very confusing. Trap tunnels are not exactly intuitive to someone who hasn't been shown the way. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If I got anything wrong, let me know in the comments below. If you think any trap needs to be better represented in a format like this, then let me know in the comments below. I don't know everything, but, you know, neither does the next guy. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. Congrats on the new year, everybody. New decade. Let's go. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a nice day. So it's been a few days, and that's because tricky videos require a bit more effort than usual, and Epic won't respond to my emails. So today we're going to be talking about the best melees in Fortnite Save the World. I'm going to switch up the format a little bit, and by that I mean instead of talking about all of the best melee weapons in the game, I'm going to go ahead and point out all of the ones that we know to be good, you know, all of the people that I talk to regularly, all of my experience in the game and everything, you know, I've chatted with people playing the game, and give you guys some examples of some of the top tier melee weapons, because those I know for certain. It's kind of weird how my information on this subject is. Like, I know the best hardware and the best swords, you know, the best, the absolute best of every single category, but there are so many melee weapons, you know. To compare to my other videos, I did all of the ranged weapons by subtype. I made a separate video on all of these different subtypes, link to all of them in the description below, but melees, because they're usually just not that good, I'm going to be covering all of the melees in one video. And this is where the format takes another turn, and that's instead of me giving all the information, I want everybody in the comments below to point out their favorite melee weapons, whether it's mentioned here or not. Mention your favorite builds, how you like to use them, what works for you, and I want this to be more of a discussion-based video rather than me just rattling off what's best in the game. Now, in total irony, let's get into the best melee weapons in Fortnite Save the World. So, technically speaking, in the scope of this video, I'm recording this at the very end of the session, but you would have never known that if I would have just stopped talking. I actually want to start off this video before I talk about everything else with the Baron, because I got to the end of this recording without ever even mentioning the best utility melee in the entire game. The Baron is, if I'm not mistaken, a pretty normal, if not that great, slower swinging, high damage hardware weapon. What everybody uses it for is for the movement speed. This is the only weapon I do believe in this entire game that has 3 movement speed perks on it. There are some honorable mentions like the 6 feet under shovel that has 2 movement speed perks, which is pretty good, but it's not 4 movement speed, and these do stack all together. So this is a 42% movement buff by just holding this weapon in your hands, and you'll probably see it in almost every single clip here today. today because of how effective it is in just every single loadout. I am almost always using a Baron, and it's not for damage. So that's probably why I forgot to mention this, but without further ado, let's start the video. Obviously, I'm going to start off with the mythic ones. The Fury and the Ravager don't need too much. The Fury is a fantastic hardware weapon that hits like a truck, and then if you charge up 7 hits, then you can right-click to rain down a meteor storm to take out everything in front of you. Just a fantastic overall weapon, and if you are fighting the Mythic Storm King, this is your best bet for taking out the Horn. It is the most damage for the Horn. And then the Ravager is a sword unlike any other, and by that I mean it's almost the exact upgrade to a Spectral Blade. So it attacks just like a normal sword, you know, fast swing speed, high damage, and then if you right-click, it shoots out like a focused beam, like a neon launcher, and it'll just kind of wipe out everything in front of it, which gives it a fantastic ranged move. That's a very, very decent distance that you get from that, and it makes this weapon extremely effective when taking out hordes of zombies. And then if you jump, you actually lunge forward with an arcing swing attack, just like you do with the Spectral Blade. Not to take too much from the Spectral Blade, though, it is also a fantastic weapon, and I'm going to take a break here to say that if you want the best perks for any of these weapons, I have covered the best ones in the description below. All 3 of the weapons that we've mentioned so far I have covered. If you want me to cover any future melee weapons, you know, some best perks videos on those, let me know in the comments below. I would love to make a video on any weapon that I haven't made already. Now that we got that out of the way, the Spectral Blade is a fantastic weapon in my opinion. I consider the Spectral Blade to be a pretty earned position as the strongest normal sword in the entire game. Perhaps one of the best melee weapons in the entire game, seeing as it's extremely versatile, very fast attack, swing speed. The perks give you so much to work with, and it's just a very, very powerful weapon that, of course, with the introduction of Mythic Storm King, has been superseded by the Storm King's Ravager. And I like to give it all that credit because if you don't have the Ravager, not everybody's beat the Storm King, and not everybody's beat it, you know, 5 times to get all the different weapons. The Spectral Blade will do you extremely, extremely well. We used this for a long, long time, long before the Mythic weapons ever came to the game. One thing I never used before the Mythic Storm King was the Surround Pound, and this is where some of the drawbacks of the melee weapons start to show. Hardware weapons, including the Fury, are usually just slow. A lot of melee weapons are usually just slow, and it takes a little bit longer for them to do the amount of damage that an AR would do with basically every single bullet. That being said, I don't want to take too much away here. I mean, with the correct loadout, you can make almost any weapon in this game work, but the Surround Pound shined among one of the best hardware in the game for taking out the Mythic Storm King's Horn, and you need a very, very powerful weapon to do that. So the Surround Pound, if you'd like, you know, a somewhat slower, high damage, you know, weapon like this, then the Surround Pound's a fantastic way to go. And that kind of falls into a group with a few others, like the Husk Warper is one that I never even really tried out. This came out with the sci-fi set, and I kind of just trusted my friends when they said it was bad, but looking back on it, watching my friends stream with it, use it in Frost Night, a little bit of action in the encampments, you can right-click with this to pull all the enemies in and effectively kill them instantly, which makes this an extremely interesting weapon, and definitely something I want to try out when I start playing this game again, because the Husk Warper seems like it has a lot of potential, and I think it might be better than I first gave it credit for. Now, to breeze past some of the slower swinging weapons just to get them out of the way, I have heard extremely good reviews on the Lead Sled. We tried it out for you guys here today. The Lead Sled received a lot of praise from when people were telling me about some of the best melee weapons in the game, and I figured it deserved its due diligence, but as I said, a lot of these weapons are sort of untested territory for me, including the Husk Stomper, which we never actually got any gameplay for, but I do believe is one of the better in the game, alongside the Husk whatever, the other medieval one, the Smasher Basher. That's another one that I recall being very, very good for a hardware weapon, but we didn't try it out here today. Let me know in the comments below. But something we did cover was the Walloper, and I don't actually believe that I have a single version of that schematic, but I got some decent gameplay from Ben's here today. This is one of those weapons that will highlight the loadout that we're using. We did use my basis for the best ninja loadout in the game, link in the description below, but for a lot of these weapons, they have specific buffs and attributes. Later on, you'll see some of the scythes don't get quite the buff they could, because scythes actually have specific heroes that buff scythes more than normal. So the Paleo Luna buff is huge, giving you extra damage based on the health is great, but it is more of a universal trait, whereas a more specialized loadout could do you better. That being said, the Walloper did a fantastic job here, just clearing absolutely everything in its path. Now, the Stabsworth is something I want to make quick work of, because if I'm not mistaken, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, it is one of, if not the fastest swinging sword in the entire game, which makes it a perfect candidate for Paleo Luna's setup, because she gives damage based on your health. That applies to every single hit from a melee weapon, so to swing as fast as possible is pretty important. And I know that the one we're using here wasn't perked perfectly, but if you buff the attack speed as fast as possible, I think it's an extremely effective choice. The Masamune, named after Goro Masamune, widely recognized as Japan's greatest swordsmith, is one of those weapons that not all of us have, but if you did upgrade your game and you went for the ninjas, then you should have a copy of this weapon. It's one of the better swords in the game, or at least it was the best for a long time before the Spectre Blade came along. I believe that today it does stand as a nice flaming sword with a decent attack speed, decent damage, and it's just a good overall weapon, and I would say one of probably the best weapon that you can get from purchasing the game. I know Nocturno fans are just writing in the comments as fast as they can, but I mean, that weapon is $100 more than the weapon we're talking about here, so you might want to chill a little bit. It's probably one of the two only good weapons that you actually get from the game, because the drum roll and the pistol and everything else that you get from purchasing the game drops off in the late game, whereas the Masamune actually remains as one of the better options of the entire game. And then I'm going to bring up the Vindertech Slicer here as one of those budget swords, meaning everybody probably has the Vindertech Slicer. It's not that good compared to everything you're seeing here today, but if you're looking to set up your first sword and you don't have anything else mentioned today, then the Vindertech Slicer might be a good way to go. It's a nice energy weapon that can get some pretty decent perks on it. I recommend giving it a shot if you haven't already. Now, I mentioned scythes earlier, and today we'll only actually be talking about two of them. Again, this is more in part due to a lack of testing than anything else. Again, I'm not a melee user myself. Typically, I only use a couple of the best melee weapons, but from people that I've talked to who are melee enthusiasts, only two have ever really been brought up seriously, and that's the Neon Scythe and the Steam Thrasher. Both of these are pretty simple weapons. The Steam Thrasher, its heavy attack is huge, so if you get spinning, it's a very, very good way to mow your lawn. And then the Neon Scythe is just sort of a, it's just the best basic scythe in the game. Really, really, really decent attack speed, lots of great perks on it. The Neon Scythe used to be better before the hero rework. Now you kind of have to make it work. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but if you use a lot of scythe buffs, then the Neon Scythe is probably your best bet if you enjoy using scythe. So the Sir Lancelot is one of two spears we'll be talking about today, and I'll cover the second one right after this, and its only main purpose is basically for pushing stuff around. I'm sure it does decent damage if you perk it up properly, but the only time I've ever seen this used in any like legitimate scenario, not just trying to use it, was it's very good for, I believe, pushing mini bosses around, if that's still even possible, and of course you can push around mist monsters and smashers. Smashers don't get affected by it quite as much, especially since recently they got buffed to be quote-unquote heavier. I don't know if that affected the Sir Lancelot, but you can tell that it pushes it around a little bit, but nothing too insane. And the other spear is something that I'm actually quite happy to talk about, and that's the Ear Splitter. The Ear Splitter is something I've used in most of our Storm King fights. We beat it about 100 times, and the Ear Splitter was used almost every single time, because when you right-click, you can slam it to the ground, channeling the damage and knocking back nearby enemies, and you can buff all of your teammates up to 4 times. Typically, especially in the Storm King scenario, you don't need to do that all 4 times, but if you right click, you can just buff all of your teammates' damage for a short time. And I thought that that was all that this weapon was good for, but when Benz was getting the gameplay for this, I found that it's actually an extremely effective weapon. You can see that it has a base 20% crit chance on this, which means you can run crit rating, crit damage, and crit half of your shots or more, and then just do a ton of really, really decent damage here, and it's kind of a good weapon to know about. So now we're going to talk about some of the more gimmicky weapons. Obviously, the stop sign and the cricket bat don't even need to be shown here today. They are two of, if not the best weapons in the entire game. If you haven't tried out the cricket bat or the stop sign, you are definitely missing out. I would highly recommend maxing out all of its perk and going out and trying that out in the real world, because that won't hurt at all. The Tree of Light is one of those event weapons that I kind of forgot about for a long time. It was only somewhat recently, actually, where somebody kind of pointed out that this is a really decent weapon. It has a really decent knockback, and it has a really decent damage. big shocker. I'm sure you could have guessed that. So every 8th hit causes a stun around the character, and I do believe that affects multiple enemies, and it's one of those slower swinging, high damage melee weapons that isn't personally my playstyle. No matter how hard that weapon hits, unless in one-shots, of course, then it's not really going to be worth it in my opinion, but it's something that's good to know, and if you do want to run around slapping stuff with a Christmas tree and you don't have the pickaxe, then this is definitely your best choice, because, I mean, it's a golden llama. Like, if that's not going to strike fear into the face of your enemies, then I don't know what will. And I think the most gimmicky, by far, is the Corsair plus Jack's Revenge. So on crit, this will increase your pistol headshot damage, and if I'm not mistaken, I can check it while the gameplay rolls here, the Jack's Revenge, on headshot eliminations boosts the critical hit chance. So these two weapons are like bread and butter. The Corsair will buff the pistol headshot, and the pistol headshot will buff the Corsair. You can use these interchangeably. Obviously, if you throw on those two pirate heroes that actually buff your sword and pistol damage, you're going to be doing some really decent damage using these two weapons. I don't know of anybody who does this regularly. If you're just looking to have some fun, then throw on these two weapons with like coconuts or something, or even rock and riff, so eat some of those wafers. You might have a really good time running this. It's kind of one of those fun loadouts. I don't know that this is exactly game changing. I don't know if it's extremely meta relevant, but you know, one buffs the other, and it's kind of a cool way to play, and it is actually a very decent sword on its own, even if you're not using the pistol. Obviously, a 6 perk is a dead perk if you're not using pistols, so you sort of have to use them to get the most out of each other, but nonetheless, both of these are actually great weapons. Even though this isn't exactly the pistol video, the Jack's Revenge is still a great choice, and the Corsair is as well. And I really do appreciate Epic adding stuff like this. I think it's fun. I don't like this specifically, because switching off between two weapons is a constant annoyance, but it is a really cool line of thought, and I'm glad that they went that direction with some weapons, because melees are some of the most diverse weapons in the entire game, and it's a really interesting area to check out if you've never played with them before. And to wrap it up here, I've only got 2 more on my list, and the one is the Astrobat, where we tried this out when it first came out, and the heavy attack, basically hitting a baseball bat, was super fun for us, and I might do it again in the future, where we basically just stood on the base with like 4 of us, and then right-clicked the Astrobat and just shot stuff from afar, shooting these balls of energy baseballs that were pretty fun, actually. It's kind of a neat weapon. It's kind of a slower swinging weapon, though. It doesn't do a ton of damage, but it is fun to use nonetheless, and definitely one of my favorite melees, even though you'll probably never see me actually using it unless I'm just having a fun time. Regardless, I felt like it deserved its little time in the spotlight, again from the sci-fi set. So that's 2 from the sci-fi set. I think I've covered almost every single, if I can find it here, I think I've covered almost every single sci-fi weapon in all of my best weapon videos. The spear I don't know much about. If that's great, let me know, but I think I haven't made a sniper video yet, you know, wink nudge, but I do believe I've covered every other weapon in this set, because the sci-fi set is right next to the military set as some of the most powerful weapons they've ever added to the game in a set form. Obviously, the mythic weapons are on top, but the military weapons were just literally game-changing. Almost every single thing that came out of the military set was just better than before, and it was a very nice set to add to the game, and the sci-fi set never ceases to impress me with what they did here. But the last one to mention is the Guardian's Will, and that's only because it's kind of an interesting weapon with an interesting story. And the interesting story is basically that it used to be bugged, where if you crafted this up, you would get like way more of the wrong material back. So I think if you recycled it at tier 4, you got like tier 5 materials and stuff, so it was a really inefficient way to just convert. It was kind of interesting. I don't know, something to know, a little bit of trivia on a bugged weapon. Oh god, Epic, don't ban me, I'm sorry, you patched it already. And the other thing is that if you right click this weapon, you can actually lunge pretty far, and I think that was used for a long time to get you up and out of hills, but I think the Fury does that better. I'm not entirely sure about that, but the Guardian's Will was basically, that's why mine's a 91. I only ever used it to get out of like a hole when I got stuck, but something worth knowing if you wanted a little bit of utility. Now, of course, if I didn't mention anything here today, let me know in the comments below. We don't know every single melee weapon in the game, my friends and I. I do know all of the best ones, like I said, but there are so many different weapons that are basically just untapped territory for us, so if I missed anything, let me know. Thank you guys so much for watching. Look forward to the next video. Let me know what you want to see next, snipers, or I think snipers are actually it, so I should probably make that video soon enough. Alright, this is it. This is the last subclass of ranged weapons that I haven't talked about. So, snipers are kind of an odd one to go out on because most snipers in this game are trash. I mean, they're just a complete garbage. I mean, Benz was begging me to never do this to him again because recording gameplay for today's video was so brutal. And it was brutal for a couple of reasons, I guess, not just one. But the main reason is, like I said, most snipers aren't that good. And beyond that, most snipers are not that great against crowd clearing. Which, in a game like Fortnite Save the World, you're going to be crowd clearing a lot. Zombies horde up, they all come in waves, you have to do a big defense, and, the only time snipers are really useful is for either if they're a fast-firing or AoE weapon, which most of them are not, or if they are very good against single-target enemies, which some of them tend to be. And the only ones that are actually good at that are some we'll talk about in just a second, but, typically that's only good for, like, mist monsters and fatties and mini-bosses, and honestly, there are very few things that a sniper can do that a rocket launcher can't do better. The only time I ever pull out a sniper for a sniper's job and nothing else is when I'm handing an obliterator to a defender. And I wouldn't even say using an obliterator to clear out a forest or something, because like I said, a rocket launcher or a soldier's minigun will do that job all the same. You'll see that I have the compression burster in my inventory. I actually waited to record this video until this was in the game, and it changed nothing. The burster is about as bad as the boom bow. We'll talk about that later. But the main snipers that are actually good for high-powered single-shot damage are the obliterators. It's perked differently because that weapon changes drastically depending on what perks it has. The old Betsy and the spyglass, which are identical. The only difference is the actual range that the two weapons has. The only discrepancy here is the reload and the damage, and that's because I have an extra damage perk on my old Betsy and an extra reload on my spyglass. If you want more information on that, I'll link all of the videos that I've covered in the description below. So basically the obliterator, the spyglass, the Ralphie's Revenge, and I don't actually think I've covered any other snipers than those. Oh, the neon sniper. I'll link them all below. If I missed any, I'll catch it then. You can check out why I perked it the way that I did, and that'll be true for anything that confuses you here. And so beyond that, it was going to be the Yemen that I was going to talk about. And that's a weapon that I personally hate. I don't like shooting a projectile. This one doesn't shoot in a straight line like every other sniper. It arcs downwards after a distance, and it makes it so that you have to actually lead the projectile because it doesn't travel instantly, and it's kind of just an odd weapon in general, and I've never liked using it, so I never touch it. But I know that it has its use cases, like people used it on the UFO when Endurance first came around, and it might be very powerful for certain specific applications, and that's true for so many weapons in this game. Many times when I say something's really good or really bad, somebody says, but it's good for this, and then they say that I'm wrong in that sense, and I'm like, no, you just found the one, niche of this game where that weapon is useful. And it's like the boom bow, for example. As bad as this weapon is, this is the part that I said I'd talk about. It's just low damage, low fire rate. And the new one is lesser damage, faster reload speed. You can put a reload perk on this, which is very nice. Link to the compression burster video in the description below. These weapons are low damage, single target, but decent because they explode. So if you want crowd clearing, that's nice, I guess. Like I said, rockets will do that job much better. So instead of using all of the footage that Ben sent, what a peach. The guy got me so much footage of all of these snipers, but in almost every other weapon video, I talk about all of the best weapons, and I work through some of the not great ones, but I talk about them anyway. When it comes to snipers, I'm going to talk about the few that I think are the absolute best and worth using. Every other sniper, if you think I missed something that's really good, let me know in the comments below. I like to have conversations with you guys. But today we're actually going to talk about the actual best ones and not cover everything. So the Blastitron 9000 is one of the snipers that I consider to be more of like a DMR. It's more of like an AR, FAL type weapon, if you come from Modern Warfare 2 like I did. It's more of like a tap fire. This isn't the kind of weapon that you're scoping in, because it doesn't have a scope, and trying to shoot high damage single targets. You're basically shooting off as many bullets as you possibly can to take out hordes of zombies as your main primary weapon. And I'm going to actually address the crescendo because I know a lot of people rank this weapon extremely high in the game. Basically, this weapon, from my experience, you have to charge up to do the amount of damage that a spyglass does for every single bullet, and it really did not impress me in that sense. The Obliterator is a fantastic all-around weapon. I actually ranked it as one of the best weapons in the entire game in my top 10 list. I'll link that below alongside all of my other weapon guides. This weapon is extremely good because it one-shots every structure in the game, and then if you put double headshot on it, you're hitting for about 250,000. Once I get a teammate in here, you're hitting for about 250,000 for every single headshot if you can keep that going. If you can't, crit rating, crit damage is actually, it's okay on this weapon. I would never really recommend crit rating, crit damage on a sniper because it fires so slow, but if you can get a fire rate perk on this, I mean, it's shooting every 0.9 seconds, so it's not that bad necessarily. I did use this on the normal Storm King before the Mythic Storm King came out. It was pretty good, but I found the Bundle Buzz to be overall more reliable for the crystals. So the Obliterator is okay with crit rating, crit damage. I definitely give it to my defenders with crit rating, crit damage because, like I said, it's slower firing, but those defenders are shooting constantly, and they almost never actually hit headshots, which was false information in my Obliterator down in the description below. So people did comment on that video and correct me. Thank you guys so much for that. But yeah, headshot damage is only good if you're a player with decent accuracy, and it's probably the best overall DPS against normal weapons, but crit rating, crit damage is probably, you know, the best for other use cases. The Old Betsy and the Spyglass are basically the same weapon as I said, and from experience, this weapon is extremely powerful for one-shotting mist monsters and even two-shotting smashers all the way up to round 100. So at about power level 100 is when this weapon just stops one-shotting. 108 missions, 106 missions, and above are just, it's just not going to one-shot mist monsters anymore, and that's kind of where I stopped using the Spyglass and started moving on towards rocket launchers. And that's kind of why I'm a little bit unhappy about my history of this weapon, because I loved it. I used it basically every single mission all throughout Canny and Twine. This was the first weapon that I upgraded to 4th tier. I made it Obsidian on accident, contacted Epic, I made it, then they made it Shadow Shard, and now it was my first Sunbeam weapon as well. I have a lot of history with this weapon, but like I said, once it stopped one-shotting mist monsters, its usefulness kind of went away. So if you are underneath, you know, the power level 100 zones and you're playing in lower Twine or Canny or even Plankerton or Stonewood, if you have this weapon so early, fantastic weapon. You can use this for a long time. I'll talk about more why I use the perks that I use in the video in the description below, but for today I can tell you that up until a certain point, this is probably one of the best snipers in the game. And I will say, in my personal opinion of what a sniper is, you know, a hard-hitting single-shot weapon, it feels like the one true sniper in the game. I'll give that also to the Obliterator because it's basically a 50 cal. I mean, if a 50 cal is not a sniper, I don't know what is. But there are basically no other weapons in the game that strikes me as, like, you know, what a normal sniper would be. But the Spyglass is just a great one to know. I already mentioned the Yemen is basically just technically higher damage than the Spyglass, but the Spyglass does have the highest base damage of any sniper right behind the Yemen, so that's something to know right there. I'm going to move on to the Ralphie's Revenge here, actually. I covered this on my channel recently. As I'm recording this in the winter of 2019 Frost Knight event, this is available from the Frost Knight Llamas, I believe, or the Winter Llamas, whatever they're calling them. And the Ralphie's Revenge is another DMR type weapon. If you put double headshot damage on this and like a fire rate, if that's even possible, I don't even know. I made a video on this. I should know what the perks are. When I made the video on the perks, I knew what I was talking about. Yeah, reload speed. You want to put fire rate on this. So this weapon is the highest headshot multiplier of any weapon that I'm aware of, and it probably is the highest in the game for headshot multiplier. It's about 6 or 7 times the amount of damage that you normally do just for the headshot damage. You can see here it's almost 10 times the amount of damage just for headshots, and I think the base is like a 6x multiplier, but if you put double headshot on it, it goes up tremendously. If you can hit only headshots on this thing, it's like a quarter million, just like the Obliterator, but it shoots about as fast. It doesn't have a scope, so it's a bit easier to use, and if you use the right sniper loadout, this is definitely a good one. And I know that I'm talking about this kind of like towards the end / middle of the video, but if you're going to be using snipers, you should probably use the right loadout, and I don't even think I have one, so I'm going to make a sniper loadout and show you what I recommend. So I went ahead and did that simply because there are only 2 sniper heroes in the game that actually like affect snipers in a meaningful degree. Redline Ramirez and the bunny dude, Rabbit Raider Jonesy. There is another person in the game. I might have put him in the collection book where he, gosh. Alright, I found him. It's Jonesy Bot. He increases your headshot damage based on the percent of your missing health. That's kind of a nice one to counterbalance Blast from the Past, but this is typically what I use. I'm not saying this is absolutely the best thing in the game. Hell, you could even take off explosive rounds, which is good for area of effect damage, and even put on the Thick Skeleton Lady, who actually gives you the 15% damage based on your weapon reload, which is something you're going to be doing a lot if you're using snipers, is reloading a lot. And as even if you're not running a crit loadout, I mean, again, this is the only other guy that actually directly affects snipers, so if you're going to have a sniper loadout, you want him in there somewhere. And that's pretty much what I'd recommend for a sniper loadout in general. I might timestamp that in the description because that was just out of the blue, but I figured if we're going to be talking about snipers, I don't have a video on the sniper loadout, so I should probably cover it in today's video here. But that's mostly it. I'm going to cover a couple of extras, and then we'll probably head on out of here, and that is the Super Shredder, which is great for the early game. Not a weapon I'd ever recommend even like spending any perk up or re-perk on it at all. It's one of those super fun ranged shotgun, but technically a sniper weapons, and it's fun to use in the early game, but it's simply just not powerful at all in the late game. So it's one of those early game weapons. If you're watching this video and your main zone is, Stonewood, Plankerton, or Canny, then this is a weapon you're going to want to try out. But if you're heading up into Twine and moving on to the later zones, you might want to keep that one aside. And the Neon Sniper is something I probably should have mentioned earlier. I know a lot of people were probably thinking it as I was talking about some of the better weapons earlier, but this is an extremely good weapon for defenders and overall usage, seeing as you can actually shoot through walls with the Neon Sniper, and I like to put double headshot damage on this. In fact, my Neon Sniper's right here. Its perks are funky, obviously, because it's level 20 with maxed out, but it's got double headshot magazine size. It's just a fun weapon to use. You can shoot right through walls. Hand these to defenders, and they'll have a bit longer range than obliterators, because defenders can actually shoot through walls based on audio with an obliterator and infinite with the Neon Sniper. So the obliterator tiles is about 4 tiles in a radius, so it's a sphere around the defender. So the Neon Sniper will have more range, but it's a bit more expensive to operate because not everybody likes to buy the energy cells, and it, I think, shoots a little bit different. I don't know, it's lesser fire rate. It compares to the obliterator in its own way. And that's pretty much it. There are plenty of honorable mentions, like the vacuum tube rifle is great if you're using Zenith. Again, this is one of those situations where this is a niche weapon. The vacuum tube sniper is not that good normally, but if you use Sub-Zero Zenith, who's actually coincidentally in the shop right now, he will freeze enemies based on your crit hits. So if you crit with the vacuum tube sniper, you'll actually freeze enemies in place, and that's an extremely high fire rate, high magazine size weapon. So this is a fantastic weapon. We basically call it a freeze ray when we're using Zenith, but that's the only situation I've ever seen this useful. And then there are weapons like the crankshot. Somewhere, I don't even think I have the weapons, and the crankshot's a pretty decent fire rate sniper. It's not that good in general compared to some of the ARs. I'm sorry, Skulls. Over 2 hours of content. You guys are still here? If you watch this in one setting, then go to bed, okay? Turn off the lights. It's probably late. Oh my god. If you watch this in moderation and in different pieces, then congrats. You probably just watched it as they were uploaded, you filthy cheater. But if you saw this all the way through to the end, even if you watched it in parts, and you got to the end of this 2-hour long video, I want you to leave a comment. Let's play a little Easter egg off of my old hero video where I said to tell me that Controller Harper has a really fetch green jacket. I want you to say that she has a really, really fetch yellow jacket. All right, that's our little code for the comments. If you made it all the way to the end, no skipsies, and you watched the whole thing, I won't know the difference, but it'll make me smile. That's it, everybody. I'm not going to talk about pretty much anything else. If I haven't addressed a sniper, it's probably not that good overall, but if I missed something that you think I should have mentioned, let me know in the comments below. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you're new, you should click subscribe, like the video, and other things that YouTubers ask. Hope you guys had a nice day, and thanks for watching.